several weeks ago. So maybe that's it. Maybe that was.
Something was causing interference. So we should put those devices away.
There you go.
Yeah, he thought it might have been mine. Are we ready? I'd like to call the Transportation Commission meeting to order on Monday, December 4th, 2017. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the November 6th regular meeting minutes and the November 9th study session minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move.
It's been made, a motion made by Commissioner Hamby, seconded by Commissioner Hurt, to approve both meeting minutes, or the meeting minutes and the session minutes. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay.
I should really abstain from the 9th. I
And-
wasn't there.
We have an abstention on the approval of the November 9th by Commissioner Ziegelmeier. Is that all right? Okay. All right, thank you. The next item on our agenda is general public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to share any comments or raise any questions that are not addressed on the regular agenda. What questions do we have from the public or comments?
Good evening. My name is Travis Robinette. I'm here representing the Schwegler Neighborhood Association tonight. At our last public meeting, we voted to request an extension of the no parking zones at the intersections of Osdale, 19th Terrace, 20th Street, and 20th Terrace. Most importantly, though, on Osdale and 19th Terrace, we feel like that there's been an uptick of accidents at these intersections because when you're pulling out onto Osdale, the parking basically comes right up to the curb, and it's really almost impossible to see cars coming forward from there. And yeah, I've had neighbors taking pictures and sending me accident reports, and so I just wanted to let you all know that we were making this request, and I've emailed Amanda and believe she has a plan to go out and evaluate the intersection. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Travis. Is there anyone else from the public that'd like to address us on an item that's not on the regular agenda? Okay. And Amanda, is there anything you need from us on that one?
No, we'll be looking at that, and you guys will see it in the future.
Okay. Thank you. So the next item on our agenda, item number 3, is the non-motorized infrastructure prioritization policy.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
All right, I'm going to kind of do a little bit of intro into this, and then Jessica here is going to present on the policy. So the city's been working for several months on a policy to a data-driven ranking criteria in order to allocate the standalone bike and ped money. It's an effort to implement the priorities identified in multiple plans, including the regional pedestrian plan, the pedestrian and bicycle issues task force report, and countywide bike plan. This will help us make strategic and efficient investments on priority routes versus serving specific neighborhoods, or it'll also help us target investments to areas that will have the most impact. So you guys saw this before, I believe, in August, and then again, it was discussed in September, kind of draft versions. There's been some more work since then. We've added ramp criteria into it, kind of as a third category. Also, I believe there was some small modifications made to others, and we kind of expanded on the policy and how the projects would be selected. So the next step after this, also want to bring up, we met with Independence Inc. Access Review Board on this. They do support the policy as it's written right now. The next steps, hopefully after approval of this, is that it would go to City Commission, we'd pass a resolution. Then we would start looking at each project and ranking them based on this criteria, all the projects that are in the current approved plans. That process is going to be used to recommend projects for the remaining $150,000 of 17 money and $450,000 of 18 money, so a total of $600,000. We'll be looking for Transportation Commission probably in February to help us determine how we're going to split that $600,000 out. before we start doing estimates on projects. Due to time constraints this year, you'll see when we get into the policy, there's a call for projects that we're going to start doing with the CIP timeline every year. Obviously, that for this next year happened already for those, so we're going to work solely off of the plans that had a lot of public input to develop these plans. That's what we're going to work on for the priorities to spend the current $600,000. Future years, there will be a call for projects concurrent with the CIP budgeting process. And then we're going to look at, in future years, trying to go in a 5-year cycle with these projects where we program it out like CIP does versus doing year to year. So we would be coming back after we split up the money between bike, ped, ramp. At your recommendation, we'd be coming back with a recommendation of a list of projects for each of those for Transportation Commission approval. So that's kind of where we're at now and what we're looking for from the commission tonight. So we'll go into, I had it up. Where is it? There it is. All right.
This criteria really provides a policy framework to help support decisions that you and the City Commission will make to work towards implementing the planning that we've done in our region that's engaged the public in a process to solicit input about their priorities for bicycle and pedestrian networks. And so we're really excited about this opportunity that helps us take the plans from plans to implementation with your help in this process. So that's really the goal when we look at what this plan can do, or this prioritization policy can do for us. Amanda mentioned at this point in time, we've identified projects from our non-motorized plans to be included at a prioritization score for 17 and 18. In future years, we'll have a call for projects. There's 3 different categories for which project scoring can happen. The first is ADA ramp prioritization. The big difference between this prioritization criteria and the general pedestrian infrastructure, which would be like sidewalk gaps or crossings, is that this one has an opportunity for user request for improved route accessibility. And this is a really important element addition that we have for ADA ramp prioritization, because we want to be able to be responsive to community requests from people who use mobility devices or people on their behalf, to make sure that they have a way in the process, regardless of the plan priorities, if there's a specific ramp that's affecting their mobility, that there's a way in the process that they can make requests and have ramp repairs made to make sure that they have mobility in their day-to-day lives. Other than that, both these criteria categories use the same network, access to destinations, and this one has a crossing type because ramps are at crossings. But the pedestrian gap one then uses this roadway volume as a proxy for crashes. That was feedback you had given us as part of the study session. So this really takes that into play, using volume as a proxy for safety, recognizing then that staff will need to do some investigative work to explore crash reports when they look at design options for projects, to ensure that the designs address safety issues that have pre-existed at locations if there's a crash history. But due to some of the feedback and discussion we had at the study session, it was kind of your direction that we wanted to move away from using just crashes, especially with the limited nature of the data provided and the delay on time from those. Then we go to the bikeway prioritization criteria, and we use from the approved bikeway plan and the PED Bike Issues Task Force reports recognized networks, the bikeway demand from the pedestrian plan, and that was generated as part of that planning process, and then roadway volume again. Recognizing that still design of any of these infrastructure options, once that corridor is selected, will need to go through a process to determine which specific type of amenity or infrastructure is appropriate to implement in the selected corridor. So we kind of see that happening in terms of project selection, and Amanda's going to talk a little bit about that process.
Okay, so that's how we're going to score and rank the projects. Then we move on to kind of project selection. So this is where I was talking before. The first step would be we would ask for your input on how that funding was going to be split up between those three categories. From that, we would go take the list and how they're scored, and we take, I don't know at this time, obviously we're going to have very high-level estimates of each project at that point, so we're going to take a gap, kind of a bunch in the top, say 10 or 15 projects of each, depending on the funding, something that equals more than the amount of funding available, so that we make sure we're considering ones that are just outside that potential range. We don't just want to take projects 1 through 8. We're going to do a more detailed look at it, a detailed estimate, so that we can come back and actually recommend, here's the 8 bike projects we recommend this year, these are the other 5 we looked at, and here's why we recommend these 8 over these, even if some of them may be lower ranked. There could be budget reasons, or we have a bunch of other criteria here with opportunities for parallel routes and equity and project distribution, economies of scale. There's a bunch of other things we're going to take into account other than how projects rank. So at that point, we would go through each. We're also going to look at feasibility, and we would come back with a project list, recommend it to you, have an opportunity for some discussion if we want to move some projects around. And one important point is ramps. We're not planning on going and saying, we're going to do this ramp, this ramp, this ramp, and this ramp, because that's really hard. There's a lot of things that play into it, because you may have to go back a certain distance on sidewalk panels once you get out there to get the slopes to work. And so what we're probably going to do is look at it more of a, we want to focus this round on ramps for safe routes to schools, or maybe we pick a couple of schools. We would like to complete routes versus do one ramp here and one ramp there. So ramps would likely be more of a recommendation of a focus area that we would go in and fix as many ramps as we could with the money available within a certain defined area. I just want to reiterate that this will help us also if we have funding opportunities that come up through grants or different opportunities. This will enable us to be able to respond to those with prioritized projects. So I think having this criteria in place, knowing that every year we're going to rerun these scores and we're always going to have a list of projects, so as CDBG money becomes available or different things, we know already where the priorities lie and we're able to respond quickly. So that's the policy. So tonight we are seeking approval from the Transportation Commission to move forward with this policy to City Commission and be able to score the projects, come back with a recommendation for the 2018 projects for next year. That's why there's a little bit of a time constraint in the sense that we want to make sure that we're ready with design to go ahead and complete projects next summer that we currently have the money for. So,
All right.
any questions?
Want to go ahead, Steve?
Well, I'll start. First thing I would say is, gee, you guys did a lot of work. This is really, I'd like to congratulate you on this because I can see what effort it took to put into this. So that's really admirable. I missed one of the work sessions where we talked about this, I think in August, and I think one of the first comments that several of us made was kind of a caution about data-driven evaluation. And looking through this today, that was in my mind, and when I got to the last page, I saw that, where was it? Under project selection, Amanda, that you went under, that this is the first step in terms of looking at all of this stuff. And I think that's really important that it is that certainly we come in here once a month and get information from you that we have to process. So you're doing the data for the most part. And we need to understand that, and I think we will get to the point where we do that. But considering that is the first step, I think that's really important for the whole process. The aspect of this that I'd like to question, all of the programs that I've attended, the webinars that I've looked at, the issue of social equity, environmental equity, whatever you want to call it, really is a big deal. And most everything that I've seen in the last 6 months really has an overlay with that. Now I'm going to kind of think out loud here that that's kind of subjective. And what I don't see here, except for maybe one case, is how that could be evaluated with data. And I think there's got to be a way that this becomes part of the evaluation from the beginning to the end. And the only place I see it, and I guess this is my question, when you look at proximity factors for high-density housing, medium-density housing, and all of that, is that trying to speak to this issue in a way? And if not, do you all see it as something that's not going to be data-driven, that's the subjective overlay that we talk about when we go through these projects?
Well, I think equity considerations in terms of distribution of projects is really important in our process. And if you start to look at when we previously had mapped some of the data-driven, or, we had mapped the bikeway projects previously in the older model to show you kind of what was appearing in that realm in terms of the priority network, you very quickly saw that immediately all the bikeway needs and projects that aren't built in part of that priority plan network identified by the Bike Ped Issues Task Force is really west of Iowa. And even more so, most of which are in what are our environmental justice zones, which are represented by minority and low-income tracts in our community. And those projects are also eligible for CDBG funding. So there are instances where equity would be the deciding factor in helping us prioritize specific projects to be selected based on funding source. It could go so far as to give points. I mean, a matrix now or in the future could go so far as to give points to projects that are solely because they're located in one area. But then I think you still have to be really careful of how are you spatially adjusting projects in the sense that it really is an entire community we need to think about mobility options for. So, I mean, we talked about it at one of the first meetings. It was the sentiment I got from commissioners during the first round when we first brought this up is that while we had it as a list in this project selection and other alternatives to weigh, that it wasn't something that the committee yet was willing to say we want to score a project based on this and give priority to projects in those zones.
Okay.
Okay. What I'm trying to tell you is you can change your mind in that regard. If you have a different sentiment about that, then I think that's at your will to decide that that should be a priority in this process, rather than just saying it should be also considered. If you feel that it should be weighted, then that's a conversation you need to have and advice you need to give to us.
Well, I would promote that personally. I'd like to know how other folks feel about that, but
I think we can get into that during the discussion if you'd like.
that's fine.
All right.
That's fine.
Are there other questions to help clarify this before we ask the public to speak on the issue? I have just a couple. On the bike demand model, one of the factors is the existence of shared use path in existing bike lanes.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain why that's part of the bike demand model?
Originally, this model was developed by our consultants Tool Design Group, when they were working to help us establish the countywide bikeway plan. The idea behind proximity to existing facilities is that you then get points and you weight stuff in the sense that you're building a network. So if you're looking at amenity improvements next to existing stuff, you're starting to grow a network in terms of proximity. For this process, we recognized that we already had a bikeway demand model, and so we took and updated just the data for some of the locations, but used the same model that was already built for us as part of that process. And those aren't to say that the new facility types that you choose, if you choose a corridor that is next to one of these that's prioritized, that you would need to continue to build with that facility type. It's just that those are the existing bikeway types that we recognize as built infrastructure in the previous plan, and so that's why the proximity to those is scored.
So the closer it is to existing infrastructure, then the higher priority additional investments would be. Is that?
Yes, correct.
And then there's no factor related to employment. And Michael Allman's letter from Sustainability Action Network specifically kind of identified that. And it's often kind of seen as part of the demand for bicycling is for people that are riding to work. Is that data available, or is there a reason why that wouldn't be part of the list of factors?
The data is available in the sense that we do that level of modeling for our travel demand modeling. We don't currently have that capacity to do that analysis in GIS. We pay about $40,000 every 5 years when we update our travel demand model to do that for roadways. It's something Michael and I've talked about previously as in something that we could explore when we're looking at our 2018 update to the bikeway plan as an option to expand how we look at bikeway demand, but it's not something we had the capacity to do within the scope of this project.
And then the other question, maybe more for Amanda, I don't know, Jessica, if you can answer this one, but when we look at the traffic calming list of projects that have been approved, was there some consideration or any consideration given to kind of looking at bike ped infrastructure improvements along with the traffic calming funds that are available for those projects?
I don't think we had previously looked at it like that. I think that, though, once we have projects ranked and we get traffic calming requests that we come to you with, that could be something that we kind of cross-reference, is how I see it is. You know, we're going to probably next year talk a lot about traffic calming, I think, in updating that policy. So I think at that point, when we bring that policy up to date with this one, it might be a time when, as we see places where you can cross-reference them, maybe you look at, can the bike ped facilities kind of help with the traffic calming and work those two together. I know the other concern is that this is specifically standalone bike ped projects is how this was budgeted, and so I think we have to be a little bit cautious going forward of mixing, is it a traffic calming request or is it a bike ped issue? So we'll have to have those conversations.
Okay.
I mean, we have looked at the existing traffic calming list of projects, and there are projects on that request list that are crossing improvements, and those have been added to because they're already approved as they've been through the process, added to the list that they will be scored along with the missing elements on collector, arterial, and safe routes to school as
Those-
part of this.
Yeah, not traffic calming requests,
Yes.
but crossing requests. So those are anywhere where it's previously been approved for a hawk signal or a marked crosswalk. Those requests, we have a list of them that we're making sure are included, so.
Is that crossing request part of the school area traffic control? Crossing, or is
No,
there
some of
another
these
list?
were from 2015, 2016, and there's a couple more recent that you'll probably be seeing come to commission that people
Okay.
came to us. Probably some of them might be tied to schools at some point, but I don't know that any of the current ones are tied to any schools.
Okay. I don't recall seeing a list of approved crossings that were waiting for funding. Is that similar to the traffic calming project list?
Well, we don't have a published list, but there's been some crossings that were approved going back to the Traffic Safety Commission and then approved by City Commission, but unfunded.
Okay.
So we've backtracked and identified a few of those, and we're going to include those into the project list that we look at.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions I have. Any other questions from commission? Okay. I welcome the public to, if anyone wants to address this item, please step on up and introduce yourself and share your comments or ask any questions.
Gary Weber, 907 Merle Court. I'm curious about why you were able to do such a great job scoring all the factors that you did score, but left the items in the project selection system unscored. The scoring system gives a certain amount of transparency because it's easy to see how you arrive on a decision that this project is more important than that project. But when you get down to the end and you have 6 items, especially the one at the end, that aren't scored, it kind of it cuts into the transparency of the scoring system. It makes it less valid, in my opinion. Can you tell me why you weren't able to score those 5 factors? Are they not?
When we worked with our GIS staff to develop this prioritization matrix, the idea was you input a set of segments, whatever you've identified, into the model and it outputs a score. Some of these are more subjective, which means you would have to manually go through and assign a score. So there already could be a lack of transparency in the sense that, like opportunities for parallel routes, someone would have to manually go in and list every project. Is this an opportunity for a parallel route? And make a subjective call about whether or not that was a criteria that could get points. Grant funding opportunities, that's one where as those come up, we are planning to run this model once a year for the process of simplicity in the sense that you allocate funding that time. So I'm not sure how else you would assign points to some of those scores where the model would be able to just do it based on the factor of proximity or based on the factor of equity. I mean, I think that's the one simple one where you could decide that you say if it's an environmental justice area, it gets a certain set number of points. But for these other ones, there would be a manual component to being able to get a model or get a score from them in the project selection.
Yeah, I think one other point too is staff's not going to be making those decisions behind closed doors. So there's a lot of projects on this list. There's a huge need, and we aren't going to be anywhere near touching that in the coming years. So we needed a way to really get that list down to a smaller subset that we could focus on looking at these items on, because they are subjective. And those are going to be the things that we're going to ask, you know, the Transportation Commission and public coming here to these meetings to weigh in on, because we're going to take more than, like I said, we're not just going to go projects 1 through 8. We're going to potentially look at projects 1 through 15 or 20 and say, hey, these are all the considerations we took. And I think that's the opportunity we'll be able to bring in those more subjective type criteria.
I guess just for an idea of scale, how many potential projects are you sorting through?
Well, it depends. The bikeway one has 20-ish, 30-ish. Some corridors are long. The pedestrian one has closer to 200 or 300 of pedestrian gaps. The ADA ramps, then we're talking thousands. So there's not the ability to necessarily manually go through in a reasonable fashion to assess some of these if you can't use the software and the methodology to be able to pre-identify some of those scores. It takes the guesswork out of it, and it hopefully tries to make it more transparent, recognizing there are some things in the selection process you're just going to have to decide on in terms of priority. And there are some things that like Public Works might know because you're doing a project in the same area, you have mobilization, cost efficiencies, and so you can get some wins there. And those are things that the model can't necessarily tell us. It's not that sophisticated.
Gary, does that answer your question?
One more question. Yeah, that does, and I guess that's what I pretty much assumed. It's unfortunate, but there it is. Marilyn Hull in a she's not here tonight, so I'll speak for her in an email to me and some other folks. She mentioned that one thing that might be a good edit, item 3, grant funding opportunities, could be edited to grant funding or cost sharing opportunities. It's become very obvious that cost sharing, like with 19th Street, was a very important factor in determining that priority of that particular project. So adding cost sharing to that item 3, grant funding opportunities, might be an appropriate edit. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Great job, staff. Really wonderful.
Anyone else in the public want to speak to this item?
Good evening. My name is Michael Allman with Sustainability Action Network. And I did submit a letter that hopefully you had a chance to read. First of all, thank you for putting this kind of policy item at the front of the meeting instead of at the very end. It's a nice change. And thank you for actually developing this protocol. We've been needing some kind of measurable protocol for years. If you read my letter, I don't think it goes far enough, but it's definitely a start. One thing from the discussion so far, that the lesson that I seem to be hearing is that as far as the measures go, we can somewhat score and prioritize projects, but it's only going so far. There's lots of wiggle room, the environmental justice, socioeconomic neighborhoods, that's left to open to interpretation, to not so much data-driven as intuitive. So if somebody gets up at some future city commission and says, well, it was scored like this, and this is what the score means, no, it's still kind of loosey-goosey, so let's keep that in mind. I think that's a valid observation. I brought up the point of, as Charlie mentioned, the proximity factors should include more scoring items such as public service centers, entertainment, and employment centers. And obviously, the socioeconomic environmental justice factor should be scored too, if we're going to have really a usable protocol here. As it is, we're not even halfway there with important factors. So if there is a way to get numbers for that, I think the commission should direct staff to work on that if you're going to adopt this as an interim policy. Personally, I'd like you not to adopt this, but to send it back to staff to rework it. And it's not that important, I think, to do it right, just so that we have the urgency for this next 2018 funding cycle. Let's put that off. We don't need it for that cycle. Let's send it back, do it right, and then we have a good policy that's really capable of scoring things for future years. But so there's two ways to approach it, and that's my opinion. I also like to point out that proximity factor for shared use paths and unprotected bicycle lanes, as I mentioned in my letter, that's a very poor yardstick. It's outdated policy. Unprotected 6-inch white line bicycle lanes are underutilized because of safety, lack of safety. From at least national statistics, 84% of potential bicyclists need protected bicycle lanes. So we should be using a yardstick that takes us in the direction of protected bicycle lanes and or separated side bicycle tracks, not shared use paths. Shared use paths are problematic for safety for people walking dogs, skateboards, pedestrians, performance bicyclists moving too fast. Shared use paths call for conflict. There's going to be accidents that's happening, lawsuits are happening in other cities. So we should be using a yardstick, not shared use paths and not unprotected bicycle lanes. But finally, the funding considerations. We heard presentation from two staff members, one from the Public Works, which, rightly so, look at these things for implementation, for design, combination of functions, implementation, funding, what it's going to cost. And the other staff member, transportation planning from the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the MPO. Two very different approaches to this kind of protocol for good reasons. You are a transportation commission. Your forte, your strength lies in ascertaining the needs for transportation among the pedestrian, bicycle, wheeled users. Your forte is not financing. The finance part will enter into the selection process. Obviously, it has to, but that's something that will come out in the process once the pedestrian bicycle project needs are established. how those needs are prioritized. And then it goes to the finance analysts, the budget people, and they put numbers on it with the help of Public Works, pinning down construction numbers. This kind of criteria should focus on function, existing performance, level of service, need, origin, destination, transportation needs. That's what I think. I don't see funding considerations having an appropriate role in any of this until it gets to the budget point back in March, when we reach it in March. I'd like to point out, for instance, any number of things that commissions, particularly the City Commission, but the Planning Commission, when they look at comparison, this is from tomorrow night City Commission meeting, looking at the police facility, a $17 million potential project, which will probably be more than that. They're looking at various methods to vet the construction, how to get contractors bidding and how to evaluate. Whether they do it by design, bid, build, which is the current process, construction manager at risk, which is a way to consider it that it's a faster way, but not by bid, or the design build. Nowhere in this matrix do you see dollars. They're looking at a methodology. They're comparing apples and oranges in every way they can, all these different details in that matrix. Once they settle on one of these, they'll put numbers to it. That's what you should be doing with your protocol. There should be no consideration of available funds, grant funds, even shared, fund sharing, until you've determined the matrix depending on need and performance for pedestrian and bicycle facilities. So that's basically the points I wanted to make. I would like to see a rewrite. Otherwise, if you want to get it going sooner, then provisional interim policy with potential for adding more matrix or more proximity factors that are measurable with numbers for employment, entertainment. I mean, you could add public facility access right now, really. I mean, what were we talking about? City Hall, the county courthouse, police facility, library. I mean, those are centers that are obviously there and easily identifiable. So those would be destinations that could be scored very easily. So I mean, I don't think we're at the point really of having a completely workable protocol here. So thank you very much for your time and for the work. It's excellent that we're getting to this point. I'd like to make sure that we do it right.
Thank you, Michael. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to speak on this item? All right, well, bring it over to the commission for discussion. Anybody want to kick us off? Steve, you want to?
Well, I'll just,
Go back to
I think we ought to consider how we could look at the equity issue in terms of data. It seems like it's less subjective than the other things that are on your list, Jessica. So that's what I'd like to make sure we're out in front on that.
I'm curious if there's a way to do that, not including it in the model necessarily, but for the projects that are presented to have some sort of scoring mechanism that is presented as, as part of that list to say, here's how we evaluated these projects. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So when we previously discussed this, we talked about basically bringing the ranked projects to you with also a map that showed the EJ areas and the non-EJ areas to help in showing which basically projects had been selected and prioritized, ranked on the list, but also then all the projects and how they fall into those categories. Is that something like what you're talking about in terms of spatially seeing it?
Yeah, I think that would help just because, we might look at a list and see that none of the projects are located in these EJ areas and want to see, you know, can we look at 20 through 25 to see if some of those projects fit in better? And so just having, you know, a measure of some sort that we're using to evaluate, I think would be helpful.
Well, and staff is going to be doing that sort of list anyway, like is this CDBG eligible or not? Because Public Works is developing a list of what projects would be proposed as part of their CDBG application process. So already they're planning to use this prioritization criteria to solicit that projects identified for prioritization as part for that funding. So staff is already going to have that yes, no, is it CDBG? It just doesn't currently have a score assigned to it that feeds into the model.
I'm really fine with that, Jessica. So basically, you're looking at it as an EJ or a non-EJ. It's one or the other. There's no gray areas. I'm perfectly comfortable with that information. I mean, that's really what I'm looking for, is just to have that you know, visible from the beginning of the discussion after we get the data.
Sure.
Are you wanting to see that as a, you know, you get 5 points if it's in, or you get 0 points, or are you saying you're comfortable just kind of us looking at that?
I
Correlation.
actually would rather, you know, it's a good question. I'd rather just see it without points. Just, you know, a map, here it is, and, you know, let the points stand alone because they're more based on a computer model and, you know, data like that where this may not be.
And
Well, the EJ area, I mean, it is just as computerized as this. It just, I mean, there's a map. It's color-coded to show you which areas are considered part of that environmental justice area, and the MPO maintains that, so
Okay.
it's not, technically, it's not difficult. The question is, would that be sufficient for your contemplation of whether this equity consideration is given to it, or does it need to be kind of offloaded from the model to us?
The question is, how do you assign points? I mean, you say 5, you say 10, 2, 1, I mean,
Yeah.
it's an arbitrary number, so I see just seeing the map will allow us to place the priority as we need to, but, you know, I think that if you place too high of a value on it, everything will be in EJ areas. If you place too low of a value, it won't make a difference, so. Yeah, and so then maybe, I see that this is a working document, and you see how it works the first year, you modify it a little bit, you see how it works the second year, you modify it a little bit, so until you get something you like to see and that works well. I mean, because, you know, there's, I won't say arbitrary numbers in there, but there's numbers that somebody has set up, and they may work well, and they may not work well. And you may see a lot of projects of one type because of the scoring system, or vice versa. I mean, I think you'll have to tweak that as you go.
I view this as policy. It implies something more than it is. This is more, I see more of a sorting tool first. As an initial sort.
Well, I'll chime in on Michael's point about it not being formally, officially. I see it as a working document too. And I think, you know, since we've been here for a year almost now, we've talked about the traffic calming policy. Should we look at it? And we've talked about maybe we should. And I think that if there was some formal mechanism, or maybe you just wake up and a bell rings and say, oh, well, we can improve this. But I think an evaluation period is good enough for me. I think you got to get something in place to see if it's going to work.
Yeah.
And if you wait until you think it's perfect, you're going to be waiting too long, you know, in most cases.
And I think we still have to evaluate it after that, so
Yeah.
if we can either pass it, use it, evaluate it, come back and edit it, or we can get it right, that we, you know, what we think is right, spend more time on it, and then still go through that process anyway.
Well, I think we're going to learn a lot when we see the points, and then we start going out to the projects and seeing, oh, gee, there's something that I didn't get from the points that really jumps out at you, you know.
Jessica, are you able to pull up the Ped Bike Issues Task Force map for the bicycle funding illustration? I think You know, the, the background for that map is actually a visualization of the bike demand model that was used by the consultant that helped to create the countywide bike plan. And I don't know all the factors, but what I've heard you say is that you've basically unpacked that model and kind of and you're presenting it to us. So I'm assuming that it used these factors: high-density housing, medium-density housing, schools, college, university, and existing facilities.
And we built a little more density since then, so we had to update it with our,
So that,
Put it on the screen.
that map, I'm sorry,
Thanks.
sorry.
in the, in the discussions with the Bike Ped Task Force, I remember, you know, this really influenced a lot of the discussion we had about where, if we had some funding, where would we invest that? And that whole, you know, area that's in red illustrated kind of like, well, we've really got to improve on the infrastructure in that area. And then we got into like what kind of infrastructure. Bike lanes were off the table. It was all about shared use path, bike boulevards, protected bike lanes. So things that are kind of appealing to what Michael has brought up about the 84% of people that just aren't going to ever ride on the street next to a car or with cars. So I'm imagining what your model is going to do is kind of replicate that and then lead us into the same place, but in a way that's really more systematic. It isn't, you know, I mean, those conversations were several subcommittee meetings of dialogue. And I feel like you've kind of captured the essence of what we did on that task force and made it, I think, even more transparent to the public. Like, what are the factors that were being considered? So I see in there, like, there's enough demand through that model of downtown Lawrence, which might get to some of those key public facilities, Michael, you mentioned, like City Hall, the courthouse, and the library. The employment demand, you know, our major employer, of course, is the University of Kansas. So that's kind of factored in. I see red near Haskell. So it kind of seems like a lot of the things that people would probably imagine are the demands for recycling are captured in that model. And I guess I wanted to bring that to everybody's attention because I'm not sure how familiar people are with the Bikeway plan and kind of how that fed the thinking of the task force. Am I off base, Jessica? Is that?
No, I think you're right on base, and one of the things that we really reiterated is this really gets from our approved existing plans to implementation. And part of that process is recognizing what is prioritized in those plans. So we already know, as Jeff talks and Steve talk about, the need to update this. When we are on a cycle and a process to update a bikeway plan or update a PED plan, and as we've made progress, those community conversations with members of the public to identify priorities and projects could change in 5 years. Next year, the bikeway one, in terms of what the elements, we know there's already the PED Bike Issues Task Force report and the countywide bikeway plan, which say different things, and we're going to have to rectify those. Well, right now, they're both recognized in the non-motorized prioritization policy. So possibly you rectify them in one plan, now you only have one scoring system, not two, because you don't have two plans. So we already know there's going to be a need as we continue to evolve the process of planning and implementing what we plan, that there will be a need to continue to revisit this policy. And that's kind of going to be built into those cycles of revising those planning processes. That's something that we identify, the MPO identifies in our workload to do for the region.
Thank you.
So I might have more for you. I was just looking at what Michael said, and one thing I'm just kind of wondering, or how it fits in, is it says the criteria should read upgrade to protected bicycle lane or separated bicycle track. And I know, I mean, that's what we're kind of talking about, that this map sort of addresses that by saying in the adopted plan priorities, along the PED Bike Issues Task Force report, long-term bikeway priority network. But does it do enough? I mean,
So the issue
Or will
about,
we,
we don't have currently any protected bike lanes
Right.
or any cycle tracks. So basically, at this point in time, if you were to score projects on a matrix based on that criteria instead of what we have in our network, which is shared use paths and bike lanes, you would basically have no stratification of projects because none of those elements exist. That doesn't mean at a future point in time that additional existing elements that we choose to build couldn't be incorporated into that and have a different matrix when we had, say you wanted to prioritize, you built a cycle track and then you want to prioritize investments in routes from that cycle track when you get to that part of the process. But we don't have that as a recommended design in terms of what's recommended as part of our outlay really in our in our bikeway plan. Like our bikeway plan, if you look at the lines underneath this on the map, the existing bikeway map, really look at future bike route, which is a sign bike route, future bike lanes, or shared use path. Those are the primary designations of facility type that this plan recognizes. And the Ped Bike Issues Task Force report called for this priority network and called for it to be higher level, separated either bike boulevard type facilities or separated facilities. And so I think that's what we have to rectify in the new bikeway plan, and then we'll have the ability to update the bikeway demand and update the prioritization matrix for how we select projects.
but since we, so I guess I would be wondering is, since we use this as our priority, can we not use what's in this plan now? You're saying we really have to rectify the.
There's no planned infrastructure and design types in this plan. What's underneath it is the bikeway plan.
Okay.
So all the gray lines are the Ped Bike Issues Task Force priority long-term network.
And we didn't
Correct.
specify.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
We
I
did,
don't remember.
so there was a little bit of that when we got into the funding illustration section. We said, well, in some cases you could do a boulevard, bike boulevard.
Okay.
And we already early on agreed that it had to be shared use path, bike boulevard, or cycle track. And then we just went to, let's look at the right network,
Okay.
not the right facility. I think there's some specific suggestions around extending the shared use path on 6th Street, taking it all the way to Wisconsin, and then changing it over to 5th Street and putting in a bike boulevard.
Right.
And on 21st Street, doing a bike boulevard, because it was more practical to have people on that street than to put people on bikes on 23rd Street. So I think there was some discussion about what kind of facility,
Yeah.
but primarily we were,
But that was just a vision, really. So once that's
Yeah.
rectified, we could add that to.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to revisit it, because if you look at the, let me go back to the. If you come back to this, all of a sudden, we have 5 points for bikeway network, we have 4 points for bikeway plan. At what point do you, there's not a process for updating the Ped Bike Issues Task Force process. I mean, that, you resulted in that committee. So at some point, we have to rectify a new plan as we move forward. And I think we're gonna have to come up with whatever that evolves to if whatever the plan outcome changes that process. And when we scope the bikeway plan, if we work to explore how we address demand and we do it in a more serious way, looking at origin destination, looking at additional features, if we have the capacity to do that, which we're exploring options for what our bikeway plan scope is going to be, we would want to integrate whatever the most current planning process and practice is through that public process in terms of what the community has told us, because our bikeway plan public engagement process will be a lot more robust than the public engagement for the bikeway task force issues report.
and I think by then we'll be further refining this policy, is I guess. I mean, the one area that I think that was really missing when we did that discussion at the task force was the model didn't connect the demand that happens because of recreation centers. And, SPL was a really obvious omission, given the, number of people that could ride their bikes to get there, or run to get there, or walk to get there. That wasn't even on the radar back when the bike plan was developed. So I think next time, that would be another one of those things that could cause a lot of demand for cycling. And employment, if there's something, KU is obviously a dominant employer that could increase that bike demand. But I'm assuming all that will be part of the new bike plan in 2019?
Yes, I think we have to figure out all of those solutions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's kind of on the topic of facility types. I don't see this policy, even though we're looking at how do we connect to the existing network of shared use paths and bike lanes, it's not suggesting that it would be with the same facility type, but that we'd be connecting with whatever is appropriate or determined to connect to it. So it doesn't rule out the use of separated bike facilities just because we're only looking for those that are shared use paths or bike lanes.
Right, but at this point, it also doesn't say, give points to something that is a higher facility.
Right.
so I'd kind of like, in response to that, and just in also response to Michael Allman's comments about whether funding is something we would use to consider. I mean, that question on the task force when we were first grappling with what would you prioritize, without without a limit on the dollar amount, it would be literally impossible for us to have made some tough decisions about what to prioritize. So I think, Michael, I respect your opinion, but I feel like the prioritization and funding are sort of the same conversation. It's one's when you're starting to get real about what should be done, it helps you to clarify, like, what should we really do if we had the money? So, I get that there ought to be a full list of everything you want to do, but ultimately, one step at a time is we have to decide what to do in 2017 and 2018 dollars. And hopefully, we give the best recommendation we can to the city commission. So, how to spend that. So I feel like that's critical to our work and should be a major consideration. The other relevant factors, some might interpret that as really wishy-washy, but I feel like you've given us, at least in this discussion, other relevant factors such as cost efficiencies, which I think maybe was meant by economies of scale, but perhaps that's also different. Traffic calming, crossing requests, all seem like they fit under that other relevant factors. I don't know if it would be helpful at all to articulate that or add some consideration that the other relevant factors need to be explicit. I guess I assume that would be the part of the discussion once you've given us kind of the shortened list, is we would have that discussion about what other factors are relevant. And in that way, I think it would be public. So I'm kind of comfortable with leaving that there, knowing especially that the policy's kind of acknowledged as a work in progress. So, I think that's really the only comment I had about it. I don't know. Is everyone feeling like we've discussed this enough?
Yeah, I would just add that, I think we've learned so far this year that with other policies, we do use them as a tool to start as a starting point for the conversation, and then what are those other factors that come into place, whether it's public comment or other things that we haven't, even identified yet. And I think that this policy will be used in the same way as just kind of narrowing it down to where do we start the conversation, and then looking at, what are some various impacts that will influence our final decision.
I think also, like, we aren't going to ever get around to saying how we're going to spend that money until we have this policy kind of adopted. So getting to the asking for more revision, I kind of feel like we're already thinking February by the time we get a list of potential projects. And so I'd hate to defer this until then to just tweak it a little bit more. So. Anyone ready to make a motion on this one?
I'll make a motion. To approve and maybe just change the wording from grant funding opportunities to grant funding cost sharing opportunities to make that clear.
A second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the policy, to recommend the policy to the city commission with the grant funding opportunities being amended to grant funding and cost-sharing opportunities. And that's motion made by Commissioner Hamby, seconded by Commissioner Ziegelmeier. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Can we add the map aspect to this easily? The justice,
Yeah,
Equity.
that's something we plan on bringing you as part of that. Do you want to explicitly state that in the policy?
I
That
would
will
like
provide
to.
that?
Yes.
I mean, it says environmental justice areas in the
Yeah.
relevant factors.
Mhm.
Do you want it to
Have
say
you, can you
map
show
will
us
be
the map?
presented, or?
I mean, I think part of it is just, some of us are really familiar.
CDBG right now?
I can visualize it. I don't really need to see it.
Yeah.
It's actually in the, I think it's in T2040.
Yeah, that's an old one.
But I mean, just to
Yeah.
show what this
Sure.
is, it's not,
It was, yes.
it's a map like a lot of maps, and I think it'd just be, you know,
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think
I
that,
don't think it's updated
the
on, is it?
project rankings will likely have like a column that
Okay.
tells you
Well,
whether that is or not,
Yeah,
also,
but I
yes
don't
or
know if the
no.
newest
Because we're
one's
gonna have to
updated on
pull
there. They
this,
redid the
like, we're,
data in it.
we talked at the last meeting about the CBDG
Mm.
funding that we're applying for. We have a deadline for that to provide projects, and we plan on using this priority. So we're gonna already have to, like she said, identify which ones are in those areas, and those are gonna be what we present. So that's gonna be something that's gonna be already provided, I guess, on those projects, is it in each area or not? So,
Like they really just redid it in the last.
and those items that are identified for the community development block grant
Yeah,
funding will not be
I have it in.
also given to us for consideration of this funding, correct?
no, once we have identified those, they will basically be pulled off the list as being
Right.
funded by that, and other ones would then move into its place.
Okay, so I have the roadway projects here shown with basically low-income minority populations are in gray and minority tracks are in the cross-hatching. So it's both of those areas together would be the EJ zones. It's the same data source. They just updated the CDBG one and they're mapped for different federal government purposes. So I'm not sure if they're the exact same definitions, but it's very similar to this. I just don't know where theirs is located.
Well, I'm sorry, we did a motion and everything.
Oh, we're discussing the motion.
Okay. Under project selection, will this be listed in your policy? These,
Yeah, like that is the entire policy. What you have in front of you is the policy.
this is the policy?
Mhm,
Okay.
yes.
So just
Fine.
maybe clarify further, in February, you're imagining a list of potential projects longer than the budget could handle. And there'll be information about each of those projects, including some high-level estimates? Or are we going to just talk about the split of the funds
I
in
think
February?
there's two separate things. There's a CBDG grant that you're gonna see projects in February for.
Okay.
That will come from this policy, that we will basically pull out the highest ranked, and we're gonna, again, ask for more than we're probably gonna receive.
Okay.
And we're gonna throw more projects at them than we're gonna be able to fund. But we're gonna take everything, basically, that's environmental justice off that list and say, here's potential projects we would do with this money. Then, also in February, we're gonna be looking for a recommendation on the split of that 600,000 so that we can go into the process of evaluating those to come back with the actual project recommendations and discussions of, you know, how we wanna execute those.
All right. So I think that helps. We're going to have a first glance at what this policy generates in terms of a project list, focused only on the EJ areas for the CDBG program. And then after that, the next month or so, we'll have the, not a list that's exclusive to the EJ areas, but really the whole community. And that'll be for the 600,000. Okay. Is there any other discussion about the motion? All right. Is there any last public comment on the motion before we vote? Okay. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you. The next item on our list, on our agenda is item number 4, the Monterey Way, 6th Street to Bob Billings Parkway traffic calming request.
All right. Sorry, here, let me get readjusted. Okay. Let me shrink this down a little bit here. Okay, in October of this year, we received a request for traffic calming on Monterey Way from 6th Street to Bob Billings. The requester cited increase in traffic, speeding, and reckless driving as reasons for the request. We went out and collected traffic data. The average speed over the entire stretch was average 85th percentile speed was 44 miles per hour. The average traffic was over 7,400 vehicles a day. As you guys know, per the traffic calming policy, the 85th percentile speed over 5 miles over the posted speed limit, which is 35 miles per hour there, qualifies for traffic calming. Also, the 24-hour two-way traffic volume for this street was greater than 3,000, which is another criteria. This is a collector street with 31-foot width, sidewalk on both sides. There's also a park adjacent to it. We sent 371 postcards to residents within 300 foot of Monterey Way or anybody that only had access off of Monterey Way. We received approximately 19 emails and phone calls with the majority against traffic calming on this sector. Most people stating that there was no houses facing it, and also that they didn't see the benefit, I guess, of traffic calming. We do recommend, the staff recommends approval of this request based on the fact that it meets 2 of the criteria in the policy.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Amanda?
Yeah, a couple questions. So we all know Wakarusa is under construction and probably started a few months ago, and I think that's a lot of that traffic's diverting to Monterey Way. Do you have traffic counts from 8 months ago that you compared to see how they changed?
I don't know that, would we have done Monterey Way in any of the, no. It's a collector, so I don't know that we would have had it.
We may have traffic counts from Monterey Way from the past, but I don't have them. We don't have them today.
Second question, you know, I've been in other communities where a road like this would be posted at 40 miles an hour, which, you know, we can all talk about that. How is the speed limit set at 35 versus 40?
Well, the speed limit should be set based off of an engineering study. Usually that's based off the 85th percentile speed, which is the speed at which 85% of traffic drives at or below. That's studies show that's the safest speed to drive, and that's the speed that you should sign the road at. How this was signed at 35, I don't know all of the past history of it, but we have several collector streets that are 35 miles an hour. There may be some that are more or less, but we don't recommend increasing the speed limit on the street, but statistically it would be safer to do that. But again, you know, when we're looking at our traffic calming policy, the notion is to create traffic calming on the street to get down more to that signed speed limit. So, you know, right now I think we're around 45 miles an hour on average, which is 10 miles an hour over. And so since it's significantly over our policy of 5, that's why we made the recommendation.
My third question is, so it's classified as a collector street right now. It seems to be acting more like a minor arterial, just connecting two arterials, and and, not a whole lot of residential traffic on it and so forth. Has that been discussed as far as changing the classification of the street at all?
We haven't discussed that. Haven't
Okay.
discussed it.
Would that change the recommendation around the speed limit?
Well, per our policy, arterial streets are not included in the traffic calming policy. So the approach we've taken in the past, if it's a arterial street or a minor arterial, it didn't qualify for traffic calming.
But would it also impact the recommended speed limit for that road if it was a minor arterial? Or does
If
that-
we changed it,
Mhm.
it would likely not impact it. Staff doesn't go around and increase speed limits. I mean, I think that's a very sensitive thing to do. So if we were to up-classify it to a minor arterial, I wouldn't recommend going out and increasing the speed limit unless we felt that there was a need to do so through a study and crash history, et cetera.
You mentioned, I don't know if I caught you correctly, but I thought I heard you say statistically it would be safer if the speed limit was set at 40? Did I hear that correctly?
The 85th percentile speed is the speed at which is the safest speed of the road, and that's generally speaking the speed at which you should establish the speed limit of the road.
So, a lot of times when we look at this criteria, we use the 85th percentile speed, it seems like to recommend traffic calming, but it almost, I don't know, that's interesting, because we use it to recommend traffic calming, but now you're saying 85th percentile speed is used to sort of determine the safest speed on that road. So kind of seems like we use it for opposite reasons sometimes. Am I wrong?
Well, again, the 85th percentile speed through engineering standards is the speed at which, generally speaking, speed limit should be set at. So, as pertained to the traffic calming policy, that's just, again, the measure at which we use through established standards and guidelines to evaluate the speed of traffic. So we don't, through our traffic calming policy, we have not taken the speed, done a speed study and recommended increasing the speed limit. We just haven't done that. We had that question come up on what the 85th percentile speed is, and when I mentioned the statistics, that's, again, that's that's engineering standards and guidelines, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you should always increase the speed limit to that speed. So there's a number of factors that go into establishing the speed limit. Some of it's the characteristic of the street, and there's some houses on it, there's some not, it just depends. And so it's not just based off the speed limit, it's one of the definable criteria that you can use. So it's...
Are there other collector or other streets with that type of daily traffic that have different speed limits than this? Or is this pretty much,
Peterson Road is 40. It's probably,
that's what I'm looking for. There are examples of other parts of town where they have a higher speed limit but similar traffic volume or design.
Yeah, I can't...
Peterson
I
doesn't
can't-
have the same number of driveways, does it?
they have a few
Yeah.
driveways on there, but not, and there's a very few on this one as well.
So does this meet the access control for arterial, for minor arterial?
I don't know that, Commissioner. We didn't review that for a minor arterial.
Is
Ju-
there
ju-
an access control standard for minor arterial versus collective?
Well, yeah, generally speaking, as we're establishing new arterial streets, we limit access to local streets unless there's no alternative access. So for this section of Monterey Way, I think it's pretty consistent with access management standards for a collector and a minor arterial. There's not a whole lot of driveways off of Monterey Way, I think maybe 5 or so. So for that length of a segment compared to a street like Harvard, west of Monterey Way, where you have a lot of driveways on the street, which we would not recommend that in the future with new streets to have driveways, residential driveways on a collector street. So in that regard, it has a little more access control than other collector streets.
What about the accident rates on this street?
I didn't look into the accidents on the street. It's not one of our criteria for traffic calming. It's not included in our traffic calming policy currently.
I think what may be unique about this, correct me if I'm wrong, is that just the length of the street from 15th to 6th that has no stop sign.
There's a roundabout at
It
Harvard.
has a roundabout, and obviously that's pretty important. The point is, I'm trying to think in Lawrence, where we have speed cushions or speed humps in that long of a stretch,
Harvard,
and I'm not
Trail.
sure I can come up with.
Harvard Trail,
Harvard Trail are that long?
yeah. I mean, Harvard's pretty long. There's traffic calming all along Harvard.
Okay.
And Trail just now got installed the same way, so. Lawrence Avenue,
Got 2 speeds.
it's pretty long, yeah.
And did we, when we put those devices in, did we see a big change in the behavior, the vehicular? Maybe a tough question.
We don't traditionally go out and do after speed studies. So depending on what street you're thinking about, I can't answer that, but we don't typically go out and do after counts on speed data.
Okay.
We do assume when we put in these speed humps that it naturally slows people down, but
What would be the options for traffic calming here?
speed humps is an option. There's a lot of things in the toolbox. Speed humps, speed cushions would be the appropriate device for a collector street that has the cutouts for emergency vehicles. We've used traffic circles before, diverters, although we wouldn't recommend that on the street, that limits access.
Diverters.
A diverter would be similar to what's at 6th and Schwartz Road, where it just allows access out to 6th Street, but not into the neighborhood or out here.
What about, what about, like, for example, there's a park there. And recently on Lawrence Avenue near Holcomb, there was just like a pedestrian island. Would that wouldn't be considered traffic calming, I guess, but would that maybe serve the purpose that might be?
That could be considered with the project. We don't have, traffic islands and crosswalks aren't listed in our traffic calming guidebook, I'd say, but similar like on Louisiana Street where we do have that narrowing of the road, I think that does have an effect. So, I think we're going to be talking about the traffic calming policy, looking at that next year, and I think that needs to be considered. So I think that would certainly be appropriate to consider at this location where you have a neighborhood to the west Monterey Way and a park to the east to do more than just speed humps and have a marked crosswalk if needed with a center island. So that could certainly be considered with the design of the project if it gets approved. Again, tonight we're just approving, adding it to the list of traffic calming, and then it will be evaluated in the future based on our criteria, scoring criteria, until we have funds to do a project.
Is there, I know we've got some stuff when the Transportation Commission was first formed, we were looking at things that had been maybe deferred for seemed like almost a year in some cases. Is there a need to address this now, or could we wait till the Harvard, or the Wakarusa project is completed to get a better sense of the volume of traffic and speed of traffic on?
the Castle project be starting up?
That's what I was gonna
The
say.
next
There's also the Castle project,
Hmm.
and,
So it could be some time.
I mean, those streets are pretty, at least in my personal experience,
Yep,
living
no,
in
there are
that
options.
neighborhood.
If you're on that side of town, you're gonna
You
take
either
one
go
or the
down
other.
Monterey or you go down Harvard,
Yep.
and I always used Monterey because it was the fastest route with the
Yep.
fewest stop signs and better conditioned road. And so,
Yeah.
traffic seems to come all the way from Peterson. So as
Mhm.
you were saying, it's kind of used more as an arterial connecting, as far north as Peterson down to 15th Street, and not necessarily a local collector.
Dave, if you were guessing, in the middle there between 10th and 11th, that seems to be where the speeds really increased. You pretty much attribute that to it's halfway down the runway.
Yeah, that would make,
I mean, those speeds are
Makes sense.
considerably higher than they are at the ends.
Yeah, 50 miles an hour.
But, I drive that every day, if not twice a day, and I don't notice the speeding in there more than 35 to 40 typically. And again, I'm going to have to attribute a lot of that just to, I think, the Wakarusa construction, because that's down to one lane, and so everybody else, water just goes the path of least resistance, so does traffic. So I suspect that a lot of that's just traffic that doesn't drive through there normally. Maybe at that high speeds as well, but, yeah.
So if this gets approved for traffic calming, then it gets put on the list, scored, put in that rank order. Is that correct? And then-
Correct.
And then, depending on the budget, it may or may not get done.
correct,
Right.
yep. We'll have $200,000 in 2018 to prioritize to that list of projects.
And also the votes, we'd still have to get the votes at that point too,
Mhm.
so.
And then it requires, can you clarify that? It requires,
Yes, and once I'm kind of going through the process right now for next year, just so everyone in the room's aware too. Once it's on the list, if it kind of is at the top of the rankings and it looks like it might have funding next year, that's when I reach out to the original requester and we start going through the process of what's it going to look like there and looking at getting the votes. And it'll be required to get within 300 foot of any device, or I would imagine anyone in this case that only has direct access to that road, like some of these cul-de-sacs. We would have to get the votes in the neighborhoods, and it's 70% have to approve it, or the project gets removed from the list. So this tonight is not, we're going to do traffic calming on Monterey Way. This is simply to add it to the list, prioritize it, and potentially go into getting votes.
That's
When-
70% have to positively affirm it.
Yes.
Not just 30% say no.
Yes, it has to have 70% votes for yes.
70% of those that vote, or 70% of those that
I don't know.
live on the property?
I think of the property owners, correct?
Within
Yes.
300
Within
feet.
300
Yes.
feet of the
Yes,
device.
70% of the property owners. So we basically go pull the property records. I give a map. We pull those property records, and 70% of that number of people.
Any other questions before we have the public addresses? Okay, thanks, Amanda. Okay, I imagine there might be some here from the public that want to talk on this
How do you switch
item.
this to that? David, how do you switch it to that?
Elmo.
Oh,
If you're here tonight to talk on this item, if you haven't been here before, basically we just ask you to come up to the stand, introduce yourself. People often tell us where they live as a way to orient ourselves to what their relation is to the project, and then give your comments. And there's quite a few of you tonight, so it'd be helpful if you could try to keep them to around 3 minutes. And you can ask questions, you can just share your thoughts, however you want to do it. Who wants to go first?
Try not to take up too much, try not to take up too much of your time, but we live at 3804 Park Place, which I put our thing up there. And I think, first off, I mean, you can see from my paper, I think you all should have a copy of that. our concerns. But I would like to take exception to a few things that I've been hearing about number of driveways, and Mr. Hamby was saying he drives through there every day. Well, that's part of the problem, in that the people who just drive through aren't there all day, every day. We're retired, and there's several other people that are as well. And as far as driveways, I was counting before I got up here, and I know of 16 right offhand, not 5. There's 2 on the north side from Harvard Circle up. One of them is a preschool with small children, and that's a driveway that's on there. And then south of the Harvard Circle, there's the park. And if you'll note in my notes there, the driveway to the park and 12th Street is blind, coming from both directions. It's also one of the few streets, there's only like 3 through streets in this town. There's Hiowa, Cassold, and Wakarusa. The rest of them, like we, end at Albemarle. But the north part of Lawrence has grown exponentially, especially at the end of Monterey Way and Cassold and all the houses up there. They have found that this is a great cut through to go where they want to go. So, and people, children play in the playground. I've seen balls go out in the street. We have the preschool, like I said. Then there's a group home, which the next person will speak to. And we're retired, and we walk every day. And this is exactly the type of thing that has been horrible, trying to get across the street. It's almost impossible. And I don't know, I think you can see the rest of our things, but I also thought it was important, the project that they talked about earlier, about the different pedestrian access areas. And I noticed one of the things said within 1/8 mile of a park. And Dad Perry Park is a huge park, and they have soccer games and tennis courts and basketball goals and volleyball courts and a children's playground, all within 100 or 200 yards of the play. And we have balls going out in the street. We have children, and it's an accident waiting to happen. I'm sorry, but I think a stop sign would be best, if nothing else.
I'm Bob Bechtel. I also live at 3804 Park Place. A couple of things I'd like to point out. Most of the letters that were sent to you were objecting to the speed bumps, but they don't address any experience of walking or crossing the street in Monterey. So apparently they don't really use the sidewalks or that area rather than just driving through. So their experience is different than ours. The second thing I would like to mention, which is in my mind sort of an underlying factor, is because of the shortage of police personnel, there's no traffic division, as I understand it. As a result, there's no enforcement of speed limits. In other words, in my mind, why do we have speed limits if they're not being enforced? At least try to. That's not your issue, it's a city issue, basically, but that's underlying how do we control the speed of these areas. I would suggest, at least temporarily, to have these electronic speed limit signs when you're going over 35, that people know how fast they're going. If you're going 45, maybe some people will slow down and not realize they're going that fast. It's just sort of a stopgap. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Amanda, for your help.
All right, thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Bechtel.
Hello, Diane Bannerman Urachek. For the last 20 years, my family has lived on Park Place, a cul-de-sac adjacent to Monterey Way. I remember when Monterey Way, between Bob Billings Parkway and 6th Street, was a small road with much less traffic. Now, Monterey Way is a very busy street. Monday through Friday, in the morning rush hour, in the late afternoon, and in the early evening, and the traffic is fast, too fast. During these times, it can be scary trying to cross the street safely. There is a school bus that stops twice a day on Monterey Way across from Perry Park to take young children to and from a home daycare. Also, there is a community living opportunities group home that houses individuals who have developmental disabilities. These individuals need more time to cross Monterey Way to get to the park and back. Perry Park is very much used by adults and children, as there is a basketball court, a tennis court, a volleyball court, soccer games, hiking, playground equipment, and picnicking. Lots of children and adults use Perry Park. Currently, I jog in Perry Park with my current 6-year-old golden retriever Bo in the morning and in the afternoon, and I always see kids and adults enjoying Perry Park. We need to reduce the speed on Monterey Way to ensure the safety of the children and adults in our neighborhood.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And there are wheelchairs in that group home.
What's the name of the group home?
Go across. It's community living opportunities.
Okay, see those.
And there are 2 wheelchairs in their home, so it's difficult to get there.
And their driveway does come down to the Monterey Way. And wheelchairs, they're trying to get across the street.
Is there anyone else from the public that'd like to address us on this item?
You going to, I guess, you gotta sign their name, sorry.
I'm just part of the Park Place Mafia.
Okay.
I've lived there since 2000. I
Yeah,
have 2
get
dogs.
that.
I too have a golden retriever and a standard poodle, and they
Ma'am, what's
get
your
walked.
name?
Standard poodle. They get walked twice a day, and we do it one day on the east side and one day on the west side. So there is a day, one time a day, that we sprint across the street with the 2 dogs. And if our work schedules require it, we're doing that in some of the rush traffic, and it can be quite exciting. So I would say, the other thing that I haven't heard mentioned, I'm sure you all know it, but that's a 2-lane street, as opposed to Wakarusa and Castle, and some of the streets that have the higher speed limits. And we've even seen people pass on that street. And somebody noted the higher speed between, I think, 10th and 11th, the 50 mile an hour. What that is they're coming around the corner from Bob Billings onto Monterey. They gun it. They can get up to good speed right around there and then slow down for the traffic circle. So I'm personally not a great fan of speed humps, but I really do like the notion of having a crosswalk where we could walk safely across the street with our dogs and all of the other fine folks that have been mentioned. So thank you very much for considering this. Thank you for your recommendation. I hope there is a way to accommodate. I don't like speed humps either, but a nice stop sign and a lovely crosswalk. Thank you.
Ma'am, what's your name?
Marcia Hoffler.
All right, thank you, Marcia. Is there anyone else who would like to address us on this topic?
I'm Tom Stevens, and I live on Goodell Court. And I wonder if you're even, or if we are even considering the real problem here. Why are people using that road? The reason that they're using Monterey is because the best route for them to take, which would be either 6th Street or Iowa or maybe Billings or Wakarusa, those streets are cobbed up by either construction or traffic signals which appear to be set to stop you at each light and make you pile up with the rest of the traffic. I've been in other cities all over this country where they have major thoroughfares like 6th Street and 23rd Street, and they're able to time the traffic lights so that blocks of traffic move through that area. rather than stopping at each light, like it's designed that way to slow you down to 10-mile-an-hour average. I think, I mean, I used Monterey a lot just recently because I couldn't get down Billing. You know, and I probably, you know, I don't live over there, and I don't have a lot of reason to go there, but I discovered that, oh yeah, you can't get down Billings because of the construction, but if I turn here at Monterey, I can drive over. I'm not going 50 miles an hour, and I don't know why anybody else would either. But it's just logic, you know. Hey, here's an unimpeded thoroughfare, let's use it to get where we're going. So I think maybe some thought should be looked at why people are using these streets. And if they're driving 50 miles an hour, it's probably because they're frustrated. You know, what's frustrating? Why are they doing that? Okay, that's all I'd say. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stevens. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to talk to us about this agenda item? Okay. Then I'll bring it over to the commission for discussion.
So I was thinking through all of these discussions, and the one lady had brought up what I was thinking the entire time is, to me, it struck me that it's more about folks getting to the park and getting across the street than it is about speed calming. And so that's kind of where I was at, is having some type of pedestrian crosswalk, you know, maybe a button they can push to get across the street when they're there, because there's sidewalks on the other side for folks to walk on. But to me, it had occurred, and she had brought up the same point, that from all the discussion, people need to get to the park. Oh,
I think that's a good
my
point.
opinion.
Amanda, you said the requester, we mentioned about the original request. Was it specifically for calming or?
Calming, it was speeds was the
Speed,
concern.
okay.
Speeds, increased traffic. There's a couple emails from Mr. Hoffler, I believe was his name.
Okay.
But yeah, it was particularly in his request. I know he mentioned that there was a park there, but it wasn't about crossing. But I believe he lives on the side of the street. I believe he lives at a cul-de-sac on the side of the street, at the same side as the park. So.
Actually, that's my husband.
Is it?
Yeah. He couldn't be here tonight, it's for application.
You live on the same side.
We do live on the side of the park, but we actually cross over, so it's not walk the same way every day. And as we're crossing over, we say hello to the people who are bringing their dogs and children from the west side coming over to the park. And so since we do cross it once a day, at least, well, twice, then we have foot, we have a sense of what they're facing going over to the park.
Yeah.
Yeah, we evaluated this as traffic calming though, because obviously they're two separate issues in a sense. We're looking at the crossings as more of the pedestrian projects. This specifically came in as a traffic calming request, which is why this right now item is being considered as that.
And I mean, it seems really clear, talking about speeds and asking for the speed to be reduced, and even mentioning people reaching 60 miles an hour. So,
Which I'm sure.
But I guess my confusion is if you have a sidewalk already that's separating pedestrians from the street, how the traffic calming helps the pedestrians more than a place for them to cross to the park would. I guess that's, and I'm not an engineer, so.
I'm going to jump in here real quick. This is part of the Douglas County Bikeway Plan. And that jumped out at me when I was looking at all of this. I think will certainly when Wakarusa and Castle, you're going to have fewer cars on Monterey. But I don't think that means they'll go slower necessarily, even though there may be fewer of them. So, you know, that'll make everybody happy. But I see, and I'm in Michael Wallman's 84% of bikers who don't want to be by 45 mile per hour cars. So I wouldn't use it as a bikeway, but I know a lot of people do. In fact, that's probably your experience on Monterey is probably on a bike more than a car. But my point is, I think it's relevant that it is on a bikeway path, and having slower traffic for people to use it may be a good thing. I really like the idea of the crosswalks being more effective in slowing traffic than perhaps speed cushions or speed humps. So I think we can throw that out, assuming this is approved. When it is evaluated, I think that would be a really good thing to look at. That's a great idea.
So, our purpose was, as a commission, to consider all transportation. And what I do hear a lot, I mean, I read all the comments, and there was a large number of people who were against it, and it was definitely based on they didn't want to slow down traffic. But I also think that is a road that has a park, and there are a lot of people who use it, and they often walk to it. It sounds like when I go to Dad Perry, I don't live in the neighborhood, so I drive. But so I think it's important for health, safety, and welfare to consider the pedestrians that are also using that. So I just see that as, if we were to have traffic calming, even if we weren't to have traffic calming, that the pedestrians need better access to that park. So good to see that happen.
Part of the challenge here that we're dealing with is that road's been built and people feel comfortable driving anywhere from 40 miles an hour on up to 50. And so to change that behavior, we're kind of left with limited options. And so I'd be concerned that the one type we talked about with speed cushions are allowed on collectors that have the cutouts in the middle, and everybody knows that it's driven Harvard. What do? Swerve in the middle of the road and go through the middle. And so to have this 4,000 people, 8,000 people total swerving through the middle trying to hit those cutouts is not a good option in my mind. I do see that Louisiana Street has had, I said, limited success with slowing down some traffic with the pedestrian islands. I've thought myself, and it's just the addition of paint, it doesn't meet Steve's criteria for being comfortable for riding on, but they have churros on that road right now. But I kind of entertained in my own mind. We have 31 feet of pavement, which leaves you about 30 feet of flat inside the curb and gutter. We went with two 11-foot lanes. That would leave 4-foot bike lanes on both sides, give the impression of narrowing up the driving lanes. Now, whether people would feel comfortable riding in those bike lanes and driving in the 11-foot lanes, it would feel like it's squeezed down, and that may have some impact of slowing people down as well. Again, I don't know if that's the best solution, but I'm in favor of a pedestrian island at the park and at a minimum.
I'm sorry, maybe I'm out of place, but I think it's important to consider the wheelchairs and the young children that are involved in this whole decision, as well as walkers and dogs. But that was, to me, very important part of it.
Yeah, thank you. We are actually in the commission discussion time, so this is really a time for us to talk to each other about what we're thinking about the topic and whether we're ready to vote on it. So before we take a vote, we will ask the public another chance to speak on the motion. So.
Are crossing treatments considered in comment at all?
No.
I don't believe so, but I mean, just as I'm not in favor of traffic calming necessarily on this road personally, but I think that a pedestrian island would provide a benefit to pedestrians in this situation. I mean, you got to remember that if we do too much here, traffic's going to go someplace else, and going to cause problems, unintended consequences. So, I mean, I think the way the street network is set up, this is on a grid, and this is one of the major thoroughfares in this area that's meant to move traffic.
It's a straightaway with few drives relatively onto it, so it feels like a faster road. And you've got a great attractor for traffic, Hy-Vee right there in that corner development. If you put traffic calming on there, it's going to be a fight for it to work.
I think, kind of going back to my experience on the road, also using it to walk and jog. And I feel like the sidewalk facilities, for the most part, are in good condition in that area. So from a pedestrian perspective, the biggest safety issue is that crossing and being able to get from the east to the west into the park. I also think, as I said before, it's difficult to look at this with construction going on at Wakarusa and on Harvard, and what could change with traffic returning to both those major thoroughfares. So I think it doesn't seem like a good candidate for traffic calming, but certainly a candidate for some sort of treatment to address the pedestrian concerns.
I just wonder, it's with the roundabout right there at Harvard, you're still getting these speeds.
I will say before that roundabout, I spent a lot of time there in high school. You could go a lot faster.
Well, one thing we could consider is if we choose to make a motion for approving with a consideration for crosswalks.
I'd be in support of that. I mean, traffic calming, the speed cushions, I kind of, I mean, hesitate on, but I mean, three crossings or something like that to help pedestrians move from one side to the other, I'd be in support of that.
Well, I also think you're going to have trouble getting to 70%.
I think it'd be a lot easier with the neighbors to get pedestrian crossings.
Would you need 70% for crosswalk? So
Not
you
for our
could,
policy, since a crosswalk's not a traffic calming device.
Well, I think people probably also wouldn't have the same objection because, remember the guy that lives there, drives there, he has to drive over that speed hump every day. He's right there.
Chris, was your suggestion 3 crosswalks along?
I mean, I don't know what the number is. I mean,
Is that a marked or is that?
I mean, I would think there is some way of sitting there and saying, here's Dadbury Park, we need to cross. I mean, I don't know if the roundabout does a good job of getting across there now, because there's,
Right now at the roundabout, so.
it's not really a raised island. It's kind of a mountable thing going on.
Yeah, it's mountable, but there is a
Right.
protected area there
Right.
for pedestrians.
I don't know what the number is. I think it's more than one.
As someone who's in the field that I'm in, I also think that the crosswalk makes more sense for folks in a wheelchair than any type of speed hump or roundabout device, since you do have CLO right there, and being in that social work field, I think that that's just a better opportunity for them to be able to enjoy that park if you have a crosswalk.
David, this reminds me of Lawrence Avenue south of Clinton Parkway, like going into, whatever the Holcomb area. So a couple years ago, I mean, from the traffic safety days, there was a request on Lawrence Avenue for traffic calming, which I believe is a collector also. Has a lot more driveways off of it, but what ended up happening was more like a crossing like we're talking about here tonight.
That's right.
That's my old,
Air brought up.
that's my old stomping ground, so that's what I think of. I mean, is there any, like, how has that helped out Lawrence Avenue? I mean, that's obviously something that's happened over the last couple of years, so. Is there any speed studies that's been done before or after?
Not on the Refuge Island and Crosswalk for Lawrence Avenue. I believe it's still on our list of unfunded projects.
So
for
it
Lawrence
did make
Avenue,
the traffic calming.
But that crosswalk was put in separately. I
Right.
think maybe even this, we did that internally.
Sure.
Street division.
I mean, I think
but
it helps out a lot because you cross that hill and you just got the straightaway down to that three-way T intersection with stop signs, and it's just smooth cruising. Speeds get up there. And it was hard to get over to Holcomb.
So if we wanted to see some consideration for crossings instead of traffic calming, how how would we do that?
Well, if we're gonna reference our policies, then crossings should be considered with our pedestrian and bicycle prioritization criteria. So to install say a marked crosswalk on this corridor, or whatever the pedestrian facility is for a crosswalk or an island or a signal or whatever it is, that would be considered with all of the other projects and prioritized accordingly based off of that criteria we just talked about.
Would that request to have that added need to come from the public then, or can we recommend that that be something that's considered for this location?
You guys could make that recommendation. You could direct us to add that to the list. Again, we're gonna take this based off the traffic calming policy, and if it's just a crosswalk, then we would recommend that you deny the traffic calming. You know, I think this is one of the things we've talked about before, to look at the policy, and that we're thinking about next year. This could be one of the things that we drill down and look at. And, you know, I think we all understand that it kind of goes hand in hand. I mean, some of the pedestrian and bicycle concerns go hand in hand with the speed, so traffic calming, and so some of this is interchangeable, but the way we've approached it traditionally hasn't necessarily been that way. So we recommend to continue, at least in the interim,
I guess
to go on our policy.
I recognize that it's not part of the traffic calming toolbox, but it's hard to not think that those crossings, especially when they kind of choke down traffic a bit, that they don't help to slow the speed of traffic. So, I mean, the ones on Louisiana certainly do that for me. I hadn't thought about the one on Lawrence, but that one is the same impact. You know, when you approach it, you kind of feel, oh, I have to pay attention right now.
The lane narrows, so you have to slow down.
Yeah, what I'm kind of curious, Dave, you mentioned possibility of bike lanes, and that road I think has been recently improved, and bike lanes were not put in there. So, is there a reason that bike lanes haven't been added to that stretch of road?
I don't know how long ago it was overlaid last, but
Well, just I mean, just north of 6th Street, that section of Monterey was just done, and I know just past Stetson is kind of where it transitions, and there are bike lanes. But so I'm really intrigued by the idea, because I'm looking at it's not the data we have, the Strava bike heat map, and it indicates there's plenty of bike demand on Monterey. And you know, we do know it's a bike route, so would lanes on that road help with the people that are using the road right now to ride on? And would that have the additional benefit of giving people that visual sense that it's a smaller road, even though it's technically not? Like, that seems like it wouldn't cost a lot to do that, and it would likely impact the speed, not of every person that uses the road, but of probably quite a few people. So it feels like those two things, putting lanes and putting in some crossings, would change how people would react to the design of the road.
And it would make it a complete street.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that, Charlie, or Commissioner. I think that things like that are more passive measures of traffic calming, narrowing the lanes. So studies would show as you do some of that, you do reduce speeds. It's not on a defined list of things for traffic calming, but again, I think it's a great idea. The street's wide enough to do that and have 2 10-foot lanes and 2 5-foot bike lanes, which is the minimum width, so it's possible to do that. Again, I think going off of our policy, that would be not in there, but we could, you could direct us otherwise.
I think the caution would be with, I like the bike lane deal and the narrowing of lanes. in combination with the pedestrian island, you have to use some special signage, because if people aren't paying attention in the bike lane, you're gonna get squeezed in the island. Same thing
Right.
happens on Louisiana. But I think that those things can be dealt with, you know, with different signing or striping and so forth. But that's a pretty inexpensive measure to do in combination with pedestrian island that could be, you know, put on the priority list. But the signing or the striping maybe could be done with city crews. You did that on Lawrence, I guess is what I'm saying, is you ran your paint on it. So I don't know, maybe that could be done quicker versus the other ones would be slower.
Are we talking about raised crosswalks or just crosswalks and islands?
I believe crosswalks and islands, but
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is there potential for raised crosswalk?
Yeah, it's potential.
You have to do cutouts for that since it's a collector though?
I don't believe we would need to do that. Again, we would consult with Fire and Med on any of these traffic calming projects. We have raised crosswalks on some collector streets. I'm thinking of 15th Street at the Burrow Creek Crossing. That's a collector street versus what we did at 11th and 19th on the Burrow Creek are crosswalks and signals, because those are minor arterials. So there's a,
What about
we've done that
Louisiana?
in the past. Louisiana, there's a raised crosswalk at 18th Street, 18th, and I think that's more of a residential street
there some
versus
raised
south of
crosswalks?
19th. South of 19th is just at grade crossings.
I thought there were some just south of 23rd, maybe I'm wrong.
Going toward Broken Arrow.
Mm-hmm.
We did approve that crosswalk at 29th and Louisiana through, was it this earlier this summer? And that's one of the ones that's going to be on the list of the bike ped projects we're going to score. So that was one of the ones that we noted.
And the bike lanes and the pedestrian islands seem to meet kind of the majority of, and I think it'll have a side effect of traffic calming at the same time for me, so.
Well, I think this speaks to the, you know, we talked early in the year about the need to spend time really looking at that traffic calming policy. And it does feel like here we are again, hitting the same kind of conclusion that the policy doesn't really comprehensively look at what's the aspiration for a particular roadway and how do we get there without it being kind of always the ad hoc decision making, but really guided by a policy that considers a lot more than just what traffic calming policy considers. So
Dave, if I understand it correctly, we really can't change the request. So we could vote that request down, but then ask you to consider doing the pedestrian crossing. Is that what we could do?
Yeah, if you felt that was appropriate, you could make that recommendation to have a, I mean, again, I would prefer us to do a study and see what's appropriate, where the crossing should be and how many, and if it should be marked, and that should all be done through a study. So I don't want to arbitrarily approve crosswalk unless we make a recommendation. You could send it back to staff to review what would be appropriate location. I think that would be a good idea. You could also defer it until we looked at the traffic calming policy, which I think we want to, I think it was one of the things we've been, again, talking about doing here next year, 2018. I think those are a couple of options so that, you know, if
I think I like the idea of referring it to you guys for some further analysis of the appropriate crossings and kind of bring it back to us with what you'd recommend for crossings, and if the bike lanes would be a supportive additional piece that I'd like to kind of see that as a package. I mean, I feel like then we really are considering the complete set of users, and it likely, like most complete streets, it will calm traffic, kind of, if we consider everybody.
Do you know, and Jessica took off, but if this was included in counts that were done earlier this summer,
For
a
the-
couple months ago. I'm just, like,
The bike ped counts?
yeah, well, yeah, the bike.
Yeah, I don't know, that's a good question.
I mean, I'm just asking, hey, do we have, I mean, we got traffic counts, we got them from Amanda in the staff report. I mean, I'd like to know how many, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of pedestrians walking up and down the road. I mean, we need to look at the whole thing, pedestrians, bicycles, I mean, there's big counts.
As Charlie mentioned, I'm sorry, the Strava heat map tells a little bit about that. I don't know if
Right.
you've seen that, but, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just started thinking, okay, so if traffic calming is done here, it's gonna be pretty far
Traffic.
down the list of when it gets done. But I feel like that might be the same case, considering we just looked at the prioritization for pedestrian, bicycles, standalone projects, which I would think this would fall under, I would assume, because it's not anything right now. So I would think that it would also fall pretty low on prioritization, but I don't know. So it's just
I think
something
the-
to consider, I guess.
Yeah, the good thing is it'd be, for at least the bike lane marking, should be fairly inexpensive if they can wrap it into one of their other pavement marking projects. And it may be, that's where your funding comes into your prioritization process is, hey, this is only a couple $1,000s, let's wrap that in there.
No, there's no bike ped counts on Monterey.
Just asking.
Any idea what that is?
To stripe it? Well, they have that cruise that can do it too.
No, I think
so-
we need to probably decide tonight, and it sounds like we're leaning against denying it.
Or sending it back for
I would suggest that we defer and ask staff to evaluate all the things we've talked about, including the bike lanes, the crosswalks, and that would be my suggestion.
So if we defer, are we then asking for all those changes and then do another
Well, it could come
Speed?
back, there's, what if it comes back, there are no good
It
crossing.
could come back that speed humps and speed cushions are
The best thing.
the best solution.
Well, if we're going off our policy today, which I would recommend doing, then we should proceed with a recommendation to approve or deny based off of our policy and the speeds and the traffic counts. And if it's to deny the traffic calming, but go back and look at other alternative measures with pedestrian and bicycle safety, for instance, the pavement marking or crosswalks, that could be another recommendation. But I think we should follow the policy on the traffic calming aspect as we've have it laid out.
Either way, we're accomplishing the same thing.
I think
Well, I think
so.
he needs an official motion
I
to
mean, I
say
think that's,
traffic calming, yes
this is
or
just
no.
one of those points where
Whatever it
recognize the
takes.
policy we have needs to be worked on. But I think we have to make a clear decision about yes or no, and include in the motion, requesting the staff do some further analysis and
So it
bring
sounds
something
like
back to us.
there's quite a bit of consensus on kind of putting this back to staff to evaluate. So is the decision to either defer making a decision on what the recommendation in front of us, or to deny the recommendation?
Well,
I
I'd
mean,
make,
is that where
I think
we're
so.
down, we're down
And
to
I'm-
at this point?
and I-
I'd make the motion to deny the
I think that's-
recommendation and to
yeah.
make a recommendation that they look at other opportunities, other, however you want to word it, but other recommendation to look at other options for traffic calming other than the speed hump that they have in here.
Bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, specifically bike lane markings,
Yes.
pedestrian islands,
Yes.
possibly crosswalks.
Which just so happen to also calm traffic.
Yeah, but not in our official
But not-
policy.
but not by the policy.
So we kind of have to go a roundabout way to
Yeah.
get there until the policy is modified.
All right. Someone want
So
to
was that a motion? Was that a motion?
I think David ought to take a shot.
Yeah.
Take
Yeah, go
a
ahead.
shot at it.
Okay, deny the traffic calming request, and then recommend that staff look at options for bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, specifically including bicycle lane marking, bike lane marking, raised crosswalk, or crosswalk or pedestrian island features for the corridor. Yeah, I don't know if you want two different motions or one motion. I guess if everybody votes, it doesn't matter.
I'm content with one motion. Is that okay, Dave? All right.
If everyone,
Is there a second to the
I'll second.
motion? All right, so Commissioner Hamby and Severin made the motion to deny the request for traffic calming on Monterey Way between 6th Street and Bob Billings Parkway, and to request staff to consider or develop a, I won't want to reword it, but to bring back to us a recommendation regarding the feasibility of bicycle pedestrian improvements that could also reduce the speed issue on the road. Is there any other discussion on the motion? Is there any public comment on the motion? Please go ahead.
Gary Weber again. Interesting discussion. Interesting discussion. There's another way to look at this, and I think you really should think about this. You have a traffic calming request coming forward. You have the staff approving it, suggesting that it pass. You have it meeting all the criteria, or at least the 2 necessary criteria for traffic calming. So you have something brought to you that looks like it should be done. You have speeding, 50 miles an hour in the count. You have people coming, asking you to do this. Now, by the time this reaches the top of the list, you will almost certainly have had your discussion about additional traffic calming toolbox. Things like chicanes, street narrowing, crosswalks with bump ins, street trees, all the things that are now becoming industry standards for traffic calming, moving away from vertical amelioration of the bumps and more toward horizontal solutions. By the time this reaches the design phase, those things will be in the toolbox, almost certainly. Then is the time for you to discuss whether you want to do a crosswalk or this or that or the other. This is traffic calming, this is not crosswalks. Eventually, it's going to be in the toolbox. Then, on top of that, you have all these letters and emails from people who say they don't want traffic calming. Those folks will have their chance when, if you approve, when it's time, when it's designed and ready to be implemented. Because if 70% of those folks don't come forward and say, okay, it's done. So if you approve it, you get, in a year or two, you get to look at it with a bigger toolbox and come up with a really good solution to solve this problem. There is a problem here. If you deny it or defer it, then these folks don't get any help. Traffic continues to speed on the street, and you have to start this whole process again. Now, I'm disappointed Mr. Hoffler's not here, but there it is. So consider that. I mean, you could do traffic calming and approve it, and it gets to the list, and then by the time it's ready to do, you have a bigger toolbox, you can come up with a good solution. But if the neighbors don't want it, if they really don't want it, they'll have a chance to kill it later on too. So I'm interested that you had this big discussion about traffic calming solutions, because this is not the time to have that discussion. This is the time to decide whether traffic calming should be approved or not approved. The time for what to do for traffic calming is later, when it comes to the top of the list and it's ready to design. That's really what this is about. And, you know, you spent a lot of time here talking about solutions, and what you ought to be talking about is traffic calming, yes or no.
Thanks, Gary. Anyone else from the public want to speak on the motion? Is there any other discussion here?
I just wanted to add that the 70% is only the residents. I mean, there's 8,000 people that use this, 8,000 vehicles that use this per day, and we have 4 essentially that are sitting here. So it's kind of a minority. And so we'll only see it now. Once we put it on that list, that's our opportunity to address it. And so we won't necessarily see another opportunity to to do anything with it again. And so I think this is our time to do what we can to envision what we need to do here.
I'll also just add, one of the things I've been observing, trying to monitor as we, as a commission, kind of grow into our understanding of our role, is how often do we spend time getting to the real heart of what has been going on in our community around transportation planning. And I think this discussion and even the previous agenda item are examples where I think this commission has really stepped up to embrace dialogue and debate and just recognition that not everything's in place just yet. But the more we grapple with this, the more we go against policy, the more it's clear that policies developed a decade ago aren't really serving the interests of our community. And so, it might not be a perfect situation, but I think this just raises our awareness of the need to, why that policy isn't working and how we need to really remember, remember that time? I mean, next year when we're revising the policy, we'll remember, Monterey Way. And, we'll remember, what was that street over there at Prairie Park that got us to realize the driveways on collectors. I mean, there are things that we're only kind of understanding, and honestly, we won't remember it if it wasn't painful. So this discussion, I think, is going to impress upon us the need to revise it in a holistic way that considers, everything that makes up a complete transportation system. So I'm optimistic we're better off today because of this discussion than we would have been if we just said, yeah, yes, no, let's move on. So,
And I would just add that we spent the previous hour just talking about a new policy that was on the table, of which there's funding for. And so I feel like by doing this, we move this from a list where it's going to sit for a year to maybe a higher priority list of the agenda item that we just discussed.
very likely. I mean, I guess it depends if it makes it through the prioritization rubric and comes back to us that way, but,
I mean, my comment with the motion that's out there right now, my opinion is, I was on traffic safety, about half the people have been there too. That was all about cars. And traffic calming, the policy that we have is all about cars.
That was our responsibility.
That was our responsibility. What we're talking about now is more forms of transportation, bikes, pedestrians, and cars. Traffic calming, the way it's written right now, just hammers those cars. I mean, we want other users to be able to use it, be it bike lanes or refugee islands or whatever. We need to think bigger. I think however we get there, we need to stop trying to use this old tool and get to the new tool that has to come through.
I think even when we see things coming to us, it feels very much like Traffic Safety Commission. And it's nice to see this commission now really saying, but what is this really about? And today we really, I think, hashed out that this was about pedestrians and people trying to get to a park. And that's important.
Can I call the question?
all right, the question's been called by Commissioner Ziegelmeier. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you all. Thank you to the public for being here tonight. Hope you appreciated that discussion, and stay in touch with Amanda and all of us if you'd like.
Thank you.
More traffic calming to come.
All right, our next item on the agenda is consideration of the traffic calming request. Item number 5, consideration of traffic calming request for Kingston Drive.
Hello, Ian. Okay, in October 2017, we received a request for traffic calming on Kingston Drive from Iowa Street to Princeton Boulevard. The request cited cut-through traffic and speeds as a concern. This is a local street, 30 mile per hour. There's a sidewalk on the south side, and it's 27-foot width residential area. It's a pretty short stretch of street. I'll pull up the map here so you guys can kind of get a feel for where this is at. This is Hallmark right here, of Iowa. The 85th percentile speed of traffic was 34 miles per hour, and the two-way traffic averaged 339 vehicles, and the cut-through traffic percentage was approximately 26%. None of those parameters meet the conditions for traffic calming. Therefore, the staff recommends denying this request. We sent out 30 letters, basically to everyone on that street and anyone within 300 foot of a side street. That we received 5 emails from that, 2 yeses and 3 nos.
All right. Are there any questions about this one? I have just kind of a, I don't know, maybe you can explain this, but the eastbound speeds seem quite a lot higher than the westbound.
I thought the same thing.
Is it going downhill, or is there?
I don't think so. I think it's fairly flat. I don't know if it's because of its people trying to get to work that are running late at Hallmark. Because the notice was, I mean, the request stated that a lot of the people driving through there were Hallmark employees. Not real sure what that is. I mean, it's pretty even down towards the stop sign at Princeton, but yeah, they definitely speed up heading towards Hallmark. I guess they're anxious to get to work.
You don't do these by time, do you?
What's that?
By time?
No, I mean, we have it, but it's a lot of
Think it'd be
data to
interesting
dig
know.
into. We really look at per the policy, the 85th percentile speed over a 24-hour period, so.
Yeah, so over a 24-hour period. I mean, they're a 24-hour operation.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a good explanation. People that are getting to work. Any other questions on this one? Okay, thank you. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address this item?
Good evening. I'm James Miner. I live on Kingston Drive, 2115 Kingston Drive. Been there for almost 30 years. And one of the things, as you all were briefly discussing there, was kind of trying to understand the layout of this area. It's a neighborhood that's been around for a while, and the streets are kind of narrow. Better perspective on this is that a lot of the homes there have single-car garages, so you can get a perspective. It's not like far west Lawrence where you got your triple-car and four-car garages and your wider streets. Yes, it is a connection from Hallmark Cards to Princeton Boulevard. And in my 30 years of living there, and as I live perpendicular to Westchester, and then on the other street on the end is Manchester. This is a shortcut, and it's a dangerous shortcut in a lot of different ways, and it needs traffic calming, and it must have it, unless you all want to sit here and discuss why somebody had a head-on collision or knocked some kid into somebody's home. So you really need to think about that. Because as these people are leaving from work or trying to cut through to get to Dillon's, which Princeton is what takes you to Dillon's on that road, or North Iowa Street, that's another piece of this puzzle. There's North Iowa, and then there's Kingston Drive, which connects into North Iowa. So North Iowa takes you not just past Hallmark Cars, but it takes you down into the other industrial areas, which is the old Quaker Oats, as well as some of the other business districts there, as well as the truckers and things like that. So as I've experienced through the years of watching this street and the families develop in the area and things like that, and the kids want to ride their bikes, and you know, they're kids. They're going to make mistakes. They're not going to see the guy going 45 miles an hour down the street, you know, and they have to make the close turns. The other thing is that some of the people try to make a quick right turn up Westchester, and I can't stop trying to count the number of times it was a possible head-on, as those that were turning towards Westchester, towards North Iowa, at the same time someone's trying to go the other way and turning in there. It really does need it needs some bumps or something like that. I would prefer to have some type of bump along that road to really slow these people down, because People are putting little signs out there that the kids are playing, things like that, to let someone know, hey, slow down, drive like you got some sense. And that's the main thing there, is that as they turn down Kingston, as they turn down Westchester, Manchester, these kids are playing. People are walking. And I can't count the times, once again, someone's maybe walking and they're trying to step on the grass, or maybe they're using the sidewalk or whatever, but all in all, the traffic is way too fast, and it needs to be slowed down before something really bad happens. So you might want to think about it in that aspect. Do you have any questions for me?
Would you consider something like, and I'm trying to think of the street, right there by the Dillons on 6th Street, where they kind of blocked half the road so that traffic could only come one way? You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I think what you're talking about is
Schwartz Road.
Schwartz Road.
Yeah, it's north of, is that the one north of Dillon's, right up in there where?
Well, there used to be a lot of cut through on people going north on on Lawrence Avenue. People would cut through Schwartz Road as kind of a
Isn't that where
shortcut.
it's adjacent or near the country club? Is that what you're talking about?
No.
Okay.
This is right there across from West Side 66, just east of.
There's a light there that goes right by the gas station, right?
Right. What you would do is block off traffic for, I'm saying, going out onto Iowa Street from
You mean
Kingston
North
or
Iowa
something.
Street, yeah.
You
I
know
don't
what
know.
I'm saying?
I see what you're saying, but that may be more of a.
I'm just asking, like, your level, I mean, that would take out what I would call the people trying to get to Hallmark. And it would just leave it for local people living in the area.
I don't know. I'd have to. I know what you're talking about, and how that would probably make it like a one-way or a road or things like that. But I don't know.
I'm just asking.
Yeah. I don't know what the other neighbors think about it, but one way or the other, something must be done about this area, because the other aspect of why you were talking made me think about is my car. I park it on the street, and when I open the door, there's times when folks are coming by and has a strong potential to take my door off. So it gives you an idea of just on that position, it gives you an idea of how narrow these streets are. So you take a narrow street, kids playing, someone going 45, add those things in there and try to make that equation work. You pretty much know what's going to happen. Eventually someone's going to get hurt. And that's what the issue is with this. It is a very serious potential risk for someone getting hurt.
Amanda, on that speed, the 45-mile-an-hour speed, that's an average?
85th percentile.
85th percentile?
They're moving pretty
I
good.
know there was some, I forgot the exact case, but there was one that we considered several months ago that there were several cars that were kind of at above 50 miles an hour, and I'm just kind of curious, like, well, this is the 85th percentile, is the range? How does it distribute?
The numbers are all skewed because the eastbound and westbound traffic counts so disparate.
Yeah, I mean, that
The
really,
eastbound count is like,
that just
you know,
puzzles
high
me.
speed, but it's a low traffic count number.
Yeah.
So if you're taking the 85th percent of the whole thing, two-way traffic, it kind of artificially drags it down.
And that may sound excessive, the 45. There's times when, I measure that. That's not all the time. But once again, you got to not just look at also the speed. You got to look at the size of the street. You got to look at the people traffic. And you also have to look at the fact that there's not a long distance before someone's turning up Westchester. So you take those speeds, even if they're going 30 miles an hour, and you take two cars turning and not seeing each other, the potential is high there for a risk. So, and that's probably on your map there where you can see right off North Iowa Street, there's not a lot of distance before they're turning on Westchester. And like I said, 30 plus miles an hour, even if it's just 35, is a high risk area there.
Through traffic.
You have a question?
Yeah, is there parking on both sides of the street? Anyone can answer that?
Yeah, there are people, I park on one side of the street. There's not much room on this other side, so there's, no. I will say that there's no on both sides of the street.
There's not restricted parking though, is there?
Yeah, I guess that's really what.
Parking's allowed on both sides, correct?
Exactly, if you want to do it, but that makes it very narrow. If you look at.
Which would slow down cars.
There's a house near the end of, closer to Princeton Boulevard, and they park on both sides of the street. And that's when one lady's home is, she has her kids out there, and she has a sign out there whenever her kids are playing to say, kind of watch out there. On my end of the street, which is more closer to North Iowa Street, most people don't park there on both sides unless there's a family gathering or once in a time type of occurrence. But it's narrow. It really drops it down to a very small one-car road when both park on both sides.
Well, that's a good thing for you. The narrower the streets are, typically the slower people drive, and so if you want to slow people down, start parking on the other side of the street, and so they have to wiggle through the cars, and that'll slow them down.
I don't think you've been over there.
Just saying.
Yeah, you know what that causes is just somebody to have their tail light taken off.
Understand.
So I mean, you know, that's a nice idea, but in this case, I have not seen even when both cars are on there, someone's whipping through there, going far faster than they should. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to address this topic tonight?
Good evening. My name's Andrew Denning. I live at the corner of Kingston and Westchester, 2204 Kingston. I'd like to start by actually thanking Amanda and Dave. I was the initial person who put in this request, and I was actually quite pleased at how quickly people responded and how quickly this process has gone. So I'm actually going to amplify on a few of the things that James has said here. First thing is I actually had a question about the report. It said the posted speed limit is 30. Is that to say that that's essentially what the law has dictated it is? Because there are no signs on our street.
And if it's not posted in residential area, it's 30 miles per hour.
Okay. So, like James, I do feel that the 85th percentile number here, we're seeing some especially excessive numbers, particularly in that section moving eastbound between Manchester and Westchester. And just to provide a little bit more context here, as he was mentioning, the parking is entirely on the southern side of the street. So people are coming up here on a very curved street, and you can't see as you're sort of coming around this curve, and now they're going from 33 towards 45 to 38 miles per hour. So there's a lack of visibility. We have somewhere between 10 and 15 kids on this short section of street who are under 10 years old, who are out riding their bikes, playing, including my 3-year-old. And I recognize that your guys' jobs is to create sort of objective measures here that say 85th percentile, under 5 miles per hour. If my child is hit because it was 34 instead of 35, I'm going to be disappointed and angry in all of these things, right? So I think what we have here is, you mentioned here that the fact that a choked road would seem to close it down. Actually, it seems to sort of channelize the traffic, and people are going faster. I actually see James often in the morning, about 6:15, when he's getting in his car, and I'm walking my dog, and people are blasting through here in massive trucks in the dark, making the visibility issues even worse, and nearly taking off James's door. I would say this happens probably once every couple of weeks. And so I would strongly encourage you to reconsider this for some of the reasons that have been brought up. And I'm curious as well about the question of data points here. If this were to be denied, I might come back and say, okay, well, why not the section between Manchester and Westchester, where we are, based on my calculations, at 36.4% at the 85th percentile. So if I were to just throw this back down the pike and say, okay, focus right here, then would we get a speed bump in this area, because this is over that 5 mile per hour difference. So thank you for your time, and I strongly encourage to consider some form of traffic calming in this area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's an interesting kind of concept. The way the average was calculated uses the whole stretch of road, not just that segment.
Yeah, and I mean, we debated this on Monterey Way when we were putting together the report. That's a long stretch, And if I split it into north and south, you got different results, and one met it more than the other. So, you know, there's gonna be cases where that helps, and there's probably gonna be cases where it doesn't, but we have to be consistent in the way we look at things, and the way we look at things is the request. And, does it change it? I mean, you guys can take that into account in your recommendation. I'm just presenting the data and providing an average for the sake of trying to compare it to our policy. That doesn't mean that that has to be your recommendation. That's why we provide you, I guess, all the data points so you can see that if there's outliers. I think we just have to have a consistent way we look at it to compare it to a policy that we have, so.
And the highest speed on the Monterey example was also kind of middle of the road, between the two ends of that section. I mean, maybe what's happening is people are slowing down as they get to the end of that stretch, and they are speeding up, you know. At least that seems to be the consistent pattern between both.
You're braking so you don't
Yeah.
plow into Iowa Street.
Yeah.
So my question is, let's say theoretically you approve this, then it goes on the ranking policy. And I believe, if I recall, there's a, miles per hour over the speed limit. And so how are you going to apply that? Are you going to use 34? And so, that puts them very, very low, probably at the bottom, because it doesn't even meet the policy right now. So, that may be the way it is, but just a heads up to everybody that that's the
I do
case.
think this,
No, thanks for
Yeah,
clarifying.
there, just going back, there was actually one that went through Transportation Safety Commission, because I was just looking at our spreadsheet, and it went through Transportation Safety Commission with 2 data points. However, when you put it on the traffic calming and scored it, he combined it to 1, and that was when David Woosley was here. So I think no matter what, these are being at some point scored. I mean, you have to have an average point, unless you're gonna consider them as separate projects on every little segment of road. So.
I do think this may be another one where the policy doesn't address destinations, a specific destination, or in the insurance business, we'd call it an attractive nuisance, where you've got a lot of people going to one location on a regular basis on a short street, and I don't think the policy addresses that again.
I'm looking, sorry, I'm looking Monterey Way, the differences in this, 443, 15, it's in small range. This one peak
Right.
at 1.5 times the posted speed. That's a little different, I think.
And I think our policy does address it in cut-through traffic too, in a sense. And we went out there and we did cut through on this one, just during peak hour, so. It does address it to a certain extent, that still the large number of people speeding on this road is local traffic per our cut-through counts.
Yeah, I was saying the cut-through count didn't seem that high. So, is there anyone else in the public that wants to address this item? We've kind of jumped into conversation or discussion, but anyone else here for this?
I missed that.
Okay.
The speeding traffic is cut through or it's not cut?
Well, I'm saying that it's only 26%, the cut-through traffic. So that tells you the majority of the traffic is local residents going onto one of those other streets.
Yeah, but the
So
guy-
I think there is probably some impact from Hallmark being there, but it's clearly not likely just that traffic that's speeding. So I think the issue's more than just, obviously, and I think you guys have stated that people are turning under those roads fairly quickly too, so.
But I think that percentage is a lot higher than 26% of those outside traffic. From what I've noticed through the years and recently, that I would say it's probably about 30 to 40, probably most of the 40% right there as those are cutting through. And the other factor is, and I'm gonna throw this in there as well, is that there's been a few times when I've actually had to walk out into the street while I was seeing some kid riding the bike and someone coming a little quick. I'm putting my life in danger, standing out there stopping, just to, just kind of walking out there to let them know, are you gonna run me over too? And that's the type of position, that's where the situation is getting. But I think going back to that percentile, I think it's a little bit higher than that 20% you're talking about there. It is a shortcut way to get to Hallmarks in North Iowa, as well as to Westchester and those other streets in there. It's going to. That's about the timing of the cut-through, so
I can't remember exactly, I think it was peak hour. So our policy states cut through during peak hour. So think the peak hour was 5 to 6, but I'm not 100% sure. So basically, we take the data, we find the peak hour, then we sit and watch. Or actually, I think they did morning and afternoon in this one. I'd have to go back and look. But we basically go out, get the data during the peak hour. We sit and we actually put somebody in each end of the road before he license plates, and we count the number.
So I would be curious in this case, because I think the hallmark shifts are 8 to 4,
Yeah.
toward midnight, midnight 8, so it's like right at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
That's a problem, so the peak hour might be different from what we expect.
So the data that,
Typically 7 to 8 and 5 to 6.
the data that we have though is demonstrating that people are speeding, not at those hours, but at these, the data that, I guess what I'm saying is if we wanted to get other data at those times, we might discover there is speeding or isn't speeding at those times, so.
And furthermore,
Is that-
there's no sign there that tells them what speed limit to go to.
Yeah.
This is the information age, everybody's got their cell phones and all that, and there's still a lot of rocket scientists out there that don't understand that a residential street, you're supposed to go about 30 miles an hour.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that is with the computer our speed, because that's the highest, the lowest count, it could be people driving all the way through. So not turning off in some place, that's the highest speed.
That's a good point. Well, we got to make a decision on this tonight, so any other discussion here?
I think, real briefly, it seems like keeping traffic out of here would be more effective than speed bumps or speed cushions, whatever they would be.
Would or would not?
Would. And I think, I go back to Forest Avenue, and it's like we debated, what effect the speed humps would be there. And I still think in many cases that the speed humps have a limited value. Yeah, they make a difference. How much, I'm not sure. But I think it's a bigger impact to keep people out of there. And if you go to the diverter, as Chris was talking about on Schwartz, that inconveniences the neighborhoods if you're doing a ride in, ride out, even if that's feasible here. But if I lived there, I'd want to have less traffic. And likely, with less traffic, you'd have slower speeds. So,
Now, that wouldn't be a bad idea, I'm not saying that wouldn't be a good idea. It wouldn't be a bad idea there because there is a park that people walk with dogs and the kids play out in the grass area. It's Peterson Park.
So at this point, we're at the point now where the commission is deliberating on the issue. I don't mean to be rude or cut you off, but we got other agenda items to get to tonight. So appreciate your comments, but we gotta keep things moving along. Thank you.
I'm going to move we approve this request,
Okay.
that we approve the installation of traffic calming, which would be against what the city is recommending.
All right, so Commissioner Ziegelmeier, and who was the second from Commissioner Hurt? To recommend traffic calming, recommend approval of traffic calming on Kingsington Drive between Iowa Street and Princeton Boulevard. Is there any additional discussion on the motion? Is there any other public comment on the motion now that we've made the motion?
I will quickly, I didn't get a chance to respond to Mr. Storm's suggestion, but I actually think that cutting this down to one way would be really useful in this case. I do humanities, not math, but I tried to figure this out. I think the average is something like 37.5 miles per hour going east. And this strikes me as rather dangerous. And so I think recognizing that this is a residential neighborhood and getting rid of some of that cut-through traffic so it's more local would be very, very helpful here. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else want to speak on the motion?
So once again, there's some cap on what he was saying was that this is a residential area, and safety is a key concern here, and that's why I'm here. And whatever decisions is made in regards to a traffic bump or a end of the road stop, whatever you want to do, we need to make something happen.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? All right. All those in favor of the motion to recommend approval of traffic calming on Kingston Drive between Iowa Street and Princeton Boulevard, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you for coming out tonight. The next item on our agenda is item number 6, the no parking request for Goodell Court.
Not sure why this isn't working. Try this again. You guys are gonna get real sick of me. All right. In November, we received a request to restrict parking to one side of the street on Goodell Court. The request cited excessive street parking and delays in travel due to the road being blocked by delivery vehicles and buses. This street is, I'll kind of show you an aerial here in a second, but it's 30 miles per hour. There's a sidewalk along the south side. It is a cul-de-sac, a fairly long cul-de-sac, and it's 26-foot width with curb and gutter. This is where it's located here. There's newer roundabout here at 31st and East 1600 Road. It's right off of that. I went out to the site on 2 occasions, one during the week, one on the weekend. Took a couple pictures, kind of showing here of the parking situation, because it was stated on the weekends it's worse. So I made a point to go out there kind of middle of the day Saturday, take a couple pictures. There's also was several pictures from the requester sent to me. I've kind of shown a couple here. Here's a good kind of visual of what the street looks like. In the times I was out there, there appeared to be sufficient width for parking on both sides and for emergency vehicles to traverse. Yeah, I admit it's not wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass with parking on both sides, but as you all have stated multiple times tonight, that's actually a good thing for speeds, to have to wait for a second while, another car passes by. We typically would not recommend restricting parking to one side, except in cases where there's insufficient width for emergency vehicles, where there's long stretches of roadway with cars parked on both sides, which could limit access, or there's sight distance concerns. So the staff is recommending denial of this request. We sent out, I thought I had it here, 39 letters. I received 8 emails in response. 6 were no and 2 were yes. I did have also, just so you guys know, you saw someone hand me a note earlier, one resident who also submitted a letter, Tanya Dye. She was here, had another commitment, but wanted me to pass on that her input is no. And she also, there's a letter in there.
Are there any questions on this one? Okay. Is there anybody from the public that would like to address us on this item?
I'm Michelle McBurney. I'm the person that originally asked for the no parking on one side of Goodell Court. I'm going on 3 years of living there, and I'm a stay-at-home mom. I have 5 little children, and mostly in my circle, there's 2 circles on both ends, and then there's like a narrow path in the middle. So when I was originally giving the complaints to Brian, I think his name was originally, he passed it on to Amanda about a month ago. And unfortunately, the summer traffic had calmed down a lot because of the lawn service stopping in October, and which, when she went out to take some videos, it made it look like there was more space on the street. We have 2 lawn crews on our street, and they live right next to each other at 2101 and then 2104, and they have big F-150 trucks with trailers attached to it with lawn service, and one of the other lawn service crews is a younger kid, and he likes to bring his friends over on the weekend, and then they park adjacent from each other on the streets. And so when we're coming through with our SUVs, it's literally like we're scraping our mirrors to get through, or we're folding our mirrors in to get through. There is one sidewalk on one side of the street, and most people park on the south side. It's just the people that park on the north side of the street that makes it hard for us, because this traffic is kind of going this way, and a lot of people go down the cul-de-sac circle, and then they turn around, and then they go to their driveways. Most people don't go down the street and park in their driveways unless they live on the north side of the street. So if you live on the south side, you got to come down and around. We have 2 school buses in the mornings that are short school buses that come and grab children, and when they come through, they stop at the residence. They don't stop at a bus stop. So if they're stopped at 2101 and we're trying to get through, we have to wait for that bus to load the child and then go down the circle or whatever it is to even get through. There's no way to get through. Early in the mornings, there's more cars. Everybody leaves for work, and then the street is cleared. One of the pictures that were on her paper, I think it was up here towards the top, this one right here with the blue truck. This is a mechanic, and he works at Midwest Mustangs. And Brian, I'm pretty sure I got his name right, he's the code enforcer for the city. He actually got this man to clear out his driveway because he had all kinds of non-working vehicles in his driveway, and every week he would bring a new car. This week, he doesn't have any propped up, but usually he has, like one week he had a car jacked up on a jack for 3 days and just left it there. And kids are playing in the circle, people are riding, dogs are running. And Brian was able to get him to remove most of the cars that were not licensed because the city couldn't do it because it was on private property. Well, then if you look onto the street, and this next one, this car right here actually does not belong to him, but it's parked there a lot. And then if you go up more, this red truck right here, it doesn't belong to him, but it's parked there a lot too. I've had to call the city on them for sitting for more than 3 days at a time. What I've noticed in the mornings is he has his crew that works with him come and drop their vehicles up on our street and leave them there until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And sometimes if it's the weekend, they'll stay till Monday. So it's kind of hit and miss, especially with the summer being over. You're not going to see the heavy traffic from the yard crews, but it's literally impossible to get down the bottom part of the circle. Now, if you go up more towards, I don't know if you had pictures up more, I don't think you did. There's not as bad when you enter Goodell Court. Those people use their driveways and they use their garages and they're all cleaned out. It's when you get down towards the bottom of Goodell Court that you have mechanics, and then we have the new KU students that just moved in for some odd reason. It's this house right here. It's full of KU students. So you've got about 5 of them living. Sometimes they park in the street like you see this guy right here because there's no parking on the actual street for them to use because the mechanic either has it sewn up or like in this one, this F-150 guy right here, he never moves his truck. He doesn't have any kids, but his driveway's always clear. The house right next to them that you see, the yellow one, that's the yard crew guy. That lady owns 4 vehicles and her son parks his yard service on the street and then has his friends come as well. The house across the street from that one, which is this one, he owns a mechanic shop, but he has another job. So in the summertime, he brings in all these fancy old school cars to work on, and then he uses the street to park his vehicles until he's done working on the vehicles inside the house. My 5 kids ride their bikes to school, and where the curve is, I live where the picture is being taken right here. You kind of got to curve up to get onto the driveway, the sidewalk, which is right here. And people like to park right here on the curb. There's not really a picture of it, but it's not really a great place to park. But then yet the other side, north side, is usually pretty full. So people are like, well, I can either park there or I have to park all the way up the street, which is too far from this circle of living. It's become not as far as speed, because I know you were saying if it was parking on one side, it makes people come down faster. That's not the problem. The problem is that people are overwhelming the street and using it when they don't live there to park their vehicles because it's kind of a abandoned street. You know, it's kind of like one of those streets, off streets, where you're like, oh, well, we can go park on this street. You know, there's not really a lot of traffic or there's not a lot of cops. UPS can make it through during the day. I've seen the mailman have to park feet away from the mailboxes because they can't get to the mailboxes because the cars are so packed up. We have old school mailboxes, so ours are like 5 in a row, and people like to block the mailboxes completely because there's no parking on the other side of the street. So I figured if you cleared up on the north side, no parking on the north side, then maybe the people would start to use their driveways as much because they wouldn't want to, you know, completely even overwhelm the south side even more. Maybe people would start saying, hey, well, maybe we should use our driveway, or hey, maybe we should park at the other circle at the end of Goodell, or at the beginning of Goodell, because there's like a lot of parking on there. No one ever uses that circle. They only use the kind of like the bottom half of Goodell Court. So our kids play in the circle and we can't see cars coming. We're not really, like I said, worried about the speed. We're just worried about the sight of the cars and the long crew people that can't seem to park their vehicle somewhere else. Especially this blue house right here next to this one. Their driveway gets cut off a lot. People park there on that curve, and when they're coming out of their driveway, you know, they got to park on one side or be really careful to not tail in the end of someone else's vehicle. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else in the public that'd like to talk to us about this item?
Sir, I've been sitting there for a while. My name's Chris Coubert. I live on Goodell Court. I've lived there for 16 years. I've never seen parking issues on the street. Yes, I do have a neighbor kid who has a big trailer that likes to park there. Talk to his mother, solve the issue. As far as the people down at the end here, as long as they're parking in their driveways, I don't see what the issue is. I honestly, I think the complainant's confused on what goes on this street. Again, I don't see any issues with parking. You know, weekends, you were out there on a weekend, I just don't see it. So I'm against it. I do have 2 children. She said I don't have children. I have 2 children that do drive. And yes, I do park one of my trucks in the driveway. It does get moved, but that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, I forgot one thing. We also have a church bus that comes through on Sundays, and it's an actual bus size and, you know, a huge bus. And when they get down to the circle, usually they have to reverse several times to get through to go back up. It's very thin, if you put cars on both sides of the street, including the F-150s. If you have them on both sides, it's very hard to get through. And then if there was to be a fire at some point and the cars are on both sides of that street, a fire truck could not make it down that road.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else in the public that'd like to address this item?
John Shepard, I live on Goodell Court, also actually live across the street from this guy. We have city trash trucks that come down every Thursday, pick up our trash. We have, as lady stated, school buses come through, no problems. UPS, FedEx is constantly on the street. I've lived on Goodell for 16 years. I actually had the house was built there and we bought it. Many years ago, I have 3 kids. Many years ago when my kids were young, 2 or 3 cars. My wife and I drive, and my always had a spare car because she works out of town. As the kids have gotten older, I have 2 that still live with me. I leave at 4:30 in the morning. My wife leaves at 7. She has MS, so she has to park in the driveway, and we don't want the kids parking behind her. So I have a Honda Accord that parks out in the street in front of my house, and Acura that parks in front of my house across the street from one of the lawn crews. In agreement, when one of the trucks is parked there, school buses can go through. Is it tight? You have to slow down, kind of like we were talking, the road kind of narrows. Yeah, they have to slow down. But I put a 30-foot pontoon boat with a truck back in my driveway with cars along the street. We've not really had issues with parking on the street, with the exception of every now and then on weekends when 1 or 2 houses have get-togethers and friends come over. Then the street has a lot of cars on it, but not a whole lot of younger folks that live there, so there's not parties or things like that going on. I just don't see a huge issue. I'm definitely opposed to it. I don't see a huge issue with parking on the street.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Those are my concerns.
Ma'am, we're having public comment. Everybody has a chance to speak. You had your chance. Appreciate you staying quiet during this time. Is there anyone else that would like to address us on this item? Okay. Then we'll have a discussion about it.
I think restricting parking to one side would make it worse than it is today. In my opinion, that's what I've typically seen and been part of. Because you take all those traffic or cars that are split between two sides, and you take them one side, and then everybody's fighting for space and driveways, and it makes things worse typically.
Anything else?
I think restricting parking will speed up traffic, and we might be having traffic calming requests.
This seems like a pretty typical street in Lawrence. I don't see a lot of uniqueness here. I know there's behavior that, you know, can be troubling, but I think from an engineering perspective, it's designed correctly and behaves as you would expect.
All right. Is there not much to discuss? Does someone have a motion on this item?
I make a motion that we deny the request for restricting parking on one side of the street.
I'll second it.
All right, the motion is made by Commissioner Payton and seconded by Commissioner Storm to deny the request for no parking on Goodell Court. Is there any discussion on the motion? Would the public like to comment on the motion? Can you please address us at the podium where the microphone is?
Yeah, I guess I'll just wait for the summer to hit again next year, and then I'll reissue it with pictures that are better. When I was speaking with Brian, he thought it was a great idea, and Brian said that he had also had put in no parking on his street before that was in the same design as ours. We have 29th or 30th and Kensington going into Goodell Court that just recently got yield signs from the people flying through there. We have kids that are walking to school, and there's a bus stop right there at the corner of Goodell Court. So there's a lot of not monitored areas where we live at, and that's, I think, why a lot of this stuff gets away with, like the parking in the middle of the street, the people that have full driveways that just decide not to ruin their driveways and park on the street. That makes it hard for the people that live at the end of the circle to come through. So, and then I'll also document the accidents that will probably occur this winter from not having any room to swerve if we need to. You've caught it on days where people have been cleared out, or that I've gotten a lot of the traffic cleared out from the work I did prior to speaking with your new transportation engineer, Amanda, that just started. So I'll just reissue it again next year with better pictures. And I also said that I would take a petition on the street to see if I could get majority of the people on the street to agree, and I never got an answer back on that. So I guess if you deny it, that would be irrelevant, right?
You know, I think anything you're doing, as you've kind of described, that would kind of build the case for your request makes sense.
Yeah, I figured I might as well, because I know that the two people that are here are the people that are parking on the street. So I was in a win-win or win-lose situation anyway. So, but I thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for your patience. Is there anyone else in the public that'd like to address us about the motion that's on the floor? Okay. All in favor of the motion to deny the no parking request on Goodell Court, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? Then the motion passes. The next item on our agenda is number 7, the traffic calming request on Cambridge Road.
Okay, in October, we received a request for traffic calming on Cambridge Road from Avalon Road to High Drive. The requesters cited speed as a concern. We went out and got the traffic data. This is a local street, 30 miles per hour, sidewalk along the south side, 27-foot width residential area. The 85th percentile speed was 29 miles per hour. The two-way traffic averaged 558 vehicles, and the cut-through percentage was approximately 25%. We sent out 20 letters, and we received 1 email in support, and that was the only correspondence. This is a street right here, so this is near the university, and there's some fraternity sororities kind of all surrounding it here. I don't think I had much else. That's it.
All right, are there any questions? All right, is there anyone from the public that would like to address us on this item?
Yeah.
My name is Ian Smith. I'm at 1622 Cambridge. So that would be this house here. So you said the 85th percentile was 29 miles per hour? Okay. That, I mean, I realize with respect to the criteria that this probably isn't a great case. However, and these are the maximums, is that right? Or what are these again?
That's the 85%.
Okay, thank you. So maybe this is more about, now that I've been kind of here all night and I'm learning a lot.
Sorry about
process.
that.
Maybe it's more appropriate to ask some questions. One would be, I'm actually 29 miles an hour. To be able to get to that speed is impressive. This is a very short street. And so I guess one of my questions is maybe for a different body, I don't know. But why if it's not posted and there is no speed limit sign on this road, why is it considered safe that 30 miles an hour would be the speed limit for this short of a road?
That's kind of a state law.
That's state law?
Mhm.
Okay. What would be the process then of, so if you get a roadway, I'm assuming that has certain parameters, you can have a lower speed limit than 30, correct? In a residential area? Is that right?
The city commission has the authority to change the speed limit on a local road.
Okay. I would want, I don't know how that process would go, but I'd be interested in learning how I could petition for there to be a lower speed. Because as you can see here, there's one house here, that's me. The correspondence you received was from this house. There are only 4 houses here, and then there's this parking lot. So it's actually a very short road. So to get to 30, that's impressive. That's going very fast for this short of a stretch. So I understand that with respect to the criteria, this probably isn't a good candidate, but maybe it's a better candidate for looking at a lower speed limit, or maybe one other question before I'm done. What is a stop sign a traffic calming device, or is that something else?
It's a traffic control device.
Traffic control device. There is no stop sign, there's no yield sign at this intersection. I notice the speed is very high where I live here, and I would be shocked if a yield sign or a stop sign didn't do something at this intersection. So that's all I have.
So, Amanda, is the request, was it to install traffic calming, or was it to lower the speed? Or speed limit?
Traffic calming study done.
Mhm. So the requester is asking if he were to, could he also ask for the speed limit to be reduced? Would that change the process that we're going through right now?
Well, I think without enforcement, lowering the speed limit, I don't know would have much impact. And I think even with enforcement, there's a lot of studies that show that that doesn't really have a lot of effect on people's driving, the speed they drive at. It's the condition of the road. They drive at the speed they're comfortable. So I know you stated there was no parking on the north side, and that you feel that contributes probably to the speeds. I don't know if you were to allow parking on the north side, if there would be anyone who would use it, because there's large parking lots and there's very few houses, so I don't know that that would do anything. But I think in order to affect speeds, you're going to have to change the condition of the driving experience somehow, and posting a different speed probably won't achieve that. So I'm not saying we can't go that route, but I just don't think it would get to where we want to get the result we want out of it.
Is there, the history why there's no parking on that side?
I do not. I'm guessing it's because it's near KU.
Yeah,
There's a lot of streets surrounding campus that limits parking to one side of the street.
I promise you,
reasonable.
if they opened it up, it would be full. By 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. I don't think that would be a problem.
might
It would
slow
be
people down.
parked. That's right.
I don't know if that would introduce other issues.
It would.
But if the request were to come back to lower the speed limit, we would based off of the speed data we have, not recommend lowering it because, as Amanda mentioned, traffic would drive the speed they feel comfortable at. So you could still provide different direction, but that would be the staff recommendation to that request.
Okay, that's what I kind of thought.
So, that being said, I feel like this is most closely like Forest Avenue. Like, it seems like we have fairly high pedestrian use, but there's a sidewalk. So is there anything else?
This does have
do
sidewalk,
that-
though.
Yeah, this does
This
have
does have
sidewalk,
sidewalk.
Forest did not. And, I mean, considering who lives around there, you can see why it would get up to 29, even on such a short road. A lot of young people. But is there anything else we could do to?
I mean, as we had the long discussion earlier, our traffic calming toolbox is fairly small.
Yeah.
That's how this request came in, and I don't know if you have any other recommendations.
Though actually allowing parking on both sides would potentially accomplish the goal.
Is
It's a
there-
question of whether or not the neighborhood wants the nuisance.
Is there a way we could allow parking on like a limited space on both sides, so it wouldn't be, like not the whole?
We've done it before, like 8 to 5 weekdays. But parking's not allowed. That gives the neighborhood the weekends.
You
Would
know,
that
this neighborhood.
solve their problem?
Pardon me?
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No.
This neighborhood, I'm sure, has talked a lot about parking. And it's got to be part of the parking study because it's adjacent to KU. So to discuss a 2-block area adding parking is part of a bigger discussion, I think, than, hey, what if?
Oh, no,
Yeah,
I think
it
you've got to
would
let the
slow.
neighborhood know, absolutely,
Well,
yeah.
the neighborhood would probably resist it because that would bring, 2 blocks away, somebody's going to say, well, hey, let's have parking on both sides to slow traffic, so.
That's certainly possible.
I mean, the good thing is the speeds aren't exorbitant. I mean, the highest 85th listed here is 33.
Yeah,
So,
really.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
not like we're looking at 45 or 50 like the previous ones.
But you do have to admit, that's impressive in 2 blocks.
Yes.
Yeah, we've seen that on others, on the forest and so forth. But,
That was even shorter though.
yeah, that was quite a bit shorter, so, yeah.
Any other discussion on this item? Would someone like to make a motion?
I'd be willing to move that we deny traffic calming on Cambridge.
All right, the motion is to deny the traffic calming request on Cambridge Road from Avalon Road to High Drive. The motion was made by Commissioner Evans and seconded by Commissioner Hurt. Is there any discussion of the motion? Would the public like to comment on the motion?
Just one last question. How would I go about requesting a study be done or something like that for this intersection here for signage, maybe a stop sign here? Who do I ask for that? Is that?
You would submit a request to our office. I mean, I do not believe it would warrant any sign there, but we'd take a look at it. So, yeah, if any signage request, you can submit that to transportation@lawrenceks.org, and we'll review the warrants and see if it's appropriate.
Okay.
All right, thank you. So there's no other discussion. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? All right, motion passes.
Thanks for hanging in there so long.
Thank you.
Bring it to us if you bring it up.
Boy, it's hard to know, like, which one's gonna get people to stay.
Yeah,
That would have been nice to knock him out. Anyway.
it's all,
Hopefully he learns.
it's a luck of the draw.
Yeah. All
It's
right.
not me now.
Next item is the, item number 8, the school area traffic control policy.
All right, so I'm going to talk about this. It's been a while in the making, but back in the summer of 2015, the city and the school district began discussing revising the school area traffic control policy. It's been referred to previously as the school crossing control policy. It was last updated in 2008. So we've been going back and forth with the school district to revise this policy, and really what we do is we build on the existing policy, and we're adding some information on adopting the safe routes to school maps that have been created for each school, so that both the city and school district agree on those routes. Also, the new policy sets some guidelines and procedures on how we handle requests to changes to the safe routes to school routes and notification process, so that before any changes are made to school area traffic control issues, the school board is notified and provides some feedback before the city were to make any changes. So again, we've been, this is kind of a long time in the making to revise this policy, which is predated this body, but we did bring it to you and kind of gave you an overview at a study session, I think in August. This policy would go with a MOU that would be executed between the city and the school district to follow this policy and the procedures, and that would be on the city commission meeting agenda here relatively soon, I believe, as I believe both parties have agreed to the final draft. So with that, I would entertain any questions, and if not, we're looking for a recommendation from this board to approve this school area traffic control policy.
Traffic engineer, transportation.
The same position, yes.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. But just it'd be nice to see that it's 6.4. Have that revised to the transportation engineer. Oh, is it up there too? A little further along there.
I know it's getting a little late, but I'm real curious about the process to get this far. Like, how long did it take and how many people? And just briefly, it's quite a body of work.
Well, David Woosley, our former traffic engineer, I think he originally created the policy, I think back in '96, and had been revised a couple of times. Most recently 2008, when the school crossing guard language was added. And then in 2015, we discussed revising it with as I mentioned, the school route maps and the procedures to make any changes. And some of that came out of discussions based off of a crossing on 27th Street by Broken Arrow Park, and the procedure that we went through or didn't go through to make a change over there. So that began the process to review it. But we've gone back and forth with school district staff. Some of it's mainly just the verbiage and the language, the legalese, I guess, in the policy to make sure everyone's comfortable with it. So there's been a number of folks that have been involved.
So the school district's ready to go with this? Or they?
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I have a question.
Mhm.
I really wouldn't mind asking Rami, but I guess it's not here. One of the things I brought up when initially looking at this was that there seems to be no ability to look at potential of number of students crossing. And so there already has to be students, so at a control crosswalk, the one I always bring up, but I think there are many schools that this would be the case, there already have to be 30 students, now it looks like it's written, so that's fewer, I think, than it used to be, crossing at an unsafe intersection to get a crossing guard. Rather than looking at how many students might be crossing, we're only looking at how many actually are. And as a result, like, you would have to be a parent letting your child cross at an unsafe crossing before you could even get a crossing guard. And I mean, the major one I've thought about in the past is Inverness and Clinton Parkway, because there's a lot of potential there. There are 4 schools. Students could be crossing, going to Bishop Seabury, Sunflower, Southwest, or Raintree. And so that's one I've thought about a lot in the past, and just by the sheer number of people I know that would like their kids to walk to school and don't. And so I just thought that was something that they might have sort of looked at more closely. But I don't know if there's no easy way to do that, or why that wasn't considered.
Yeah, the guess on the possibility, I mean, it's just, it'd be difficult to assume how many people would cross. If there was a route, a priority route that a school felt needed to be reviewed, we could work with them to identify if there's any resources to do something temporarily to see if it made an impact. I don't think we've done that in the past. Or if it was really close to meeting the criteria, that could be considered too, but I haven't been involved in a situation like that previously.
So if it's on a safe route to school, right?
Yeah, it is.
And so if you were to say hey, there's going to be a crosswalk at this location for the next month, and look at how many students are then crossing because you've done like a pilot.
Yeah.
Would something like that be a possibility, I guess?
I'd like to give some thoughts on this, because I think this is, just a little more background on this. This policy got kind of kicked over to the Safe Routes team that was assembled between the health department, the school district, and several departments within the city, including Public Works, Planning, Parks and Rec, law enforcement, fire medical. So it was a pretty big kind of interdepartmental staff team. And David Woolsey then went through this line by line with me and Chris Tilden at the health department. And often our frame was, we don't know anything about the manual of uniform traffic control devices, but we can imagine how people might read this document. So help us to translate what's required into something that might be read by the public. And when we got to this topic around crossing guards, it was really clear that this wasn't going to be the time to revisit the crossing guards that are currently in place, or the policy even to consider how they're changed. So I don't mean to minimize it, but given all the other changes to the policy, I'll just kind of share that this was the one area that after over a year of work on the policy, this one wasn't really ready to be kind of considered, honestly. And so it's work that's left that still, I think, is, I would say this is work that still needs to be looked at. And part of that is there is really I think, concern about taking away a crossing guard where there has been one historically. And when you look at the limited resources to put crossing guards, to make that kind of recommendation, I think staff's in no position at this point to do that without kind of some guidance from probably either us or the city commission itself to kind of give broader kind of study of the issue. There clearly is evidence from the Safe Routes work that the potential demand on some routes is higher than the actual demand or the potential demand for some other routes where there is a crossing guard. So we recognized in the process that something's not quite adding up. Like where there's the highest potential demand is not where we have the crossing guards. But there's a lot of political considerations and historical considerations for why do we have it in certain places. It's kind of like looking at the issue of where we have stop signs that don't meet the warrants. Once it's been established by ordinance to do something like that, it's complicated to just unpack it. So my recommendation is we let it go for now, but just recognize that this issue isn't one that's been fully resolved. And likely, there's people in the public that, you know, think that we need to also still resolve this. But for the sake of getting us to the point where we're at and getting us to a policy being adopted, I would argue that it is well overdue to get this in the books. And the fact that the city and the school district have found a place where they can agree to have some shared responsibility for those routes is, I think, a huge accomplishment, honestly.
Okay.
So,
I have
think,
another question, so.
you know, and it's really literally been kind of the last time this was really touched by anyone on that Safe Routes team was months ago.
Mhm.
It's been really at an impasse, and it's kind of we basically kind of been out of it for a long time now,
Mhm.
because it's really between the city and the school district. So there's nothing else to do other than let the attorneys talk about it.
Okay.
And I think they found an amicable approach with an MOU. There's a whole other section on here that I was kind of upset that got taken out, which was the policy around the use of rapid rectangular flashing beacons. Which I think, you know, a lot of, I mean, I don't know the whole story, but I recognize that there's a issue with the Federal Highway Administration's kind of guidance on that, so that makes sense. Well, maybe now is not the right time to be putting that in the policy. It doesn't mean that way of helping pedestrians get drivers to yield is not invalid. It just means that's not probably ready for the policy.
So I have another question.
So,
Related to that. It says, at a crosswalk controlled by a stop sign, traffic signal, pedestrian, hybrid beacon, if the average number of students is 30 or greater. So is that evaluated once a year? Is that ever evaluated, whether more than 30 students are there? And then I actually guess I read this earlier, but it probably may address this. And then is it somebody has to propose that change? I mean, I guess.
I'd say at this point, it's not systematically ever reevaluated.
Unless it's brought to somebody's attention.
Yeah, so this is, I think,
Okay.
it's good work. We probably should tackle it at some point. But it's gonna be complicated, and we have to be ready to take that on if we wanna do that. So in our thoughts around a Transportation Commission retreat, you know, part of that time I'd like to spend is, what is it that concerns all of us that keeps us coming back together? And, you know, maybe this is one of those items for you. So let's at least kind of track it. I don't know if we can tackle everything in the next 12 months, but if we can start to, you know, put these placeholders on issues we know need to be addressed at some point in time, we can, you know, better then figure out how to organize to make progress on those issues. This is one of those where I kind of go, well, it's certainly huge progress, and that's at this point.
Mhm.
Something's better than nothing.
Yeah, it's progress, and so that's, you know, it's hard to get happy about progress sometimes, but you can still see how much further work.
Well, and it was just more of a, I remember it being discussed, so I paid no attention to it. So when I read my packet, I went, oh, that never got resolved. More that, not so much that I think, you know, we should scrap the whole thing or anything.
Right.
So.
Well, you know, there's no, the red line version of the old and the new it got so out of hand that it was really just kind of let's replace the old and put this one in place. And, you know, this was all done without Amanda's input, so I kind of have that in my head too. It's like, after some time, Amanda's gonna probably have ideas as, you know, her role emerges as a, you know, expert in this area. I mean, this was mostly done with David Woolsey's input, so I'm curious, like, as we continue to manage and deal with the policy dimensions of our work, you know, how much you might recommend in terms of further refining, not just this, but just the whole bucket of kind of policy issues that we want to address to recommend to the City Commission.
So is that your way of saying you'd like for us to move?
I love it.
I will make that motion.
Okay. All right.
I'll second.
All right. motion's been made by Commissioner Ziegelmeier, seconded by Commissioner Severin, to recommend approval of the school area traffic control policy to the city commission. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Are there any abstentions? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. And the next item is staff items.
We do not have any.
All right, the next item is commission items. See, we have the Complete Streets Subcommittee minutes. Anything else the committee wants to report on?
I think we'll wait until next month. We've had a meeting, and the webinar that you and I viewed the other day was very interesting. So I think we need to process that into everything we've been talking to for the last several weeks. So
Okay.
we'll leave it at that.
Is there anyone else that has an item?
A couple questions. Have we landed on a January date?
We'll do that in the calendar.
Yeah.
Is
Gotcha,
there anything
okay.
else under commission items
Yeah.
anybody wants to bring?
Amanda, it might be helpful, at least for me, when you do traffic counts, if you could also tell us the date and the times.
Oh, yeah, it's on the maps, I just didn't highlight it.
Okay.
So I probably should have pointed that out to you guys. I've been putting it at the
Oh,
bottom
down
of
at the
the
bottom, okay,
maps.
I'm sorry.
I could highlight that in the future.
Well, no, if it's there, I just missed it.
Yeah.
Because that might avoid some questions that you get.
Yeah, so like here, I'm putting it here, taking 11 o'clock on 11/8 to 11 o'clock on 11/9.
Gotcha.
So.
Thank you.
If that's helpful, I'll continue to put it there.
The only thing I wanted to add in the commission items is I wanted to acknowledge, since this is our last regular meeting with two of our commissioners, I wanted to acknowledge your service on the commission. I know yours was a temporary appointment as a process of supporting our transition to this new commission. It's Commissioner Storm and Commissioner Hamby that are both serving those temporary positions. So this is your last hurrah. Thank you for your time and your insights throughout the year. I'll miss you guys both, honestly. So I think you both contributed a lot, and especially I think tonight's discussion. David, your contribution to that first whole thing about Monterey, I really appreciate that. So I hope you'll still follow our work, maybe come and speak to us on occasion, and consider applying when there's a position available in the future. So, and especially Commissioner Storm, thanks for being the vice chair this year. With my travel schedule, there were a few times when you had to fill in, and I appreciated you being able to do that. So, next item on our agenda is the calendar.
I did have one other.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Item. I will actually be replaced by another member at KU, Donna Alteen,
Okay.
from Director of Parking and Transit, will be taking over my position as representative for University of Kansas.
Well, and thank you
I
for your
appreciate
service as well.
the time that I've spent with you guys, and I know Donna will be a great addition to the commission, if approved, I assume.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for your service as well. All right, the next item is the calendar. Obviously, we got a study session coming up on the 14th, and the topics are
Sidewalk maintenance.
Sidewalk maintenance.
And the 2018
Street
maintenance plan.
Okay. And the sidewalk maintenance is not, it's really going, just clarifying what the current process is, and we're not yet tackling, like, what do we do differently? It's really to help educate the rest of us that haven't been kind of seen Dave's presentation about how it works now, and what the likelihood is that if someone files a complaint that it actually gets resolved, sort of how that process works. So stuff we saw in the task force, Aaron, if you're thinking about, remember there was a couple slides on that, and it's been presented to the city commission, and I just asked in response to a comment, I forgot who from the public asked for some sidewalk maintenance stuff, and I said, we all need to know what the current process is, especially given the discussion about doing something different. Let's get clear on what we're currently doing. So it'll be kind of an update to that presentation.
Did you just say that was the 14th?
Yep.
Yes.
Our mid-month meeting is the 14th, right?
Yes. And then there's the poll that Amanda did for the retreat. I think both dates, the last two dates looked good, so
Yeah.
we're going to pick the 26th? is that-
26th. I have already reserved this room.
Okay.
I'll send out an invite to everybody. We're gonna probably be looking for a couple
It's a
people to
Friday,
help
right?
us.
It's Friday,
It's
yeah.
Friday.
We'll do like 9 to 4, is that what we're thinking?
Yeah, we could set whatever time you guys want. I think we'd like a couple commissioners who want to help set that kind of agenda for that day, maybe to meet a couple times with us and talk through what we should talk about. So maybe think about who is interested in helping with that process.
I'll
But-
certainly help. Is there anybody that's eager to help with that? I was kind of imagining you might be. Steve. Is there anybody else? Leave it in our...
I'm glad to help, I don't care.
You interested in it? All right, how about
Okay.
3 of us? You can,
Okay.
does that sound good? And then you're just thinking, come get together a couple times to go over? Okay.
Yeah, just to kind of go over what we want to set as the agenda, make sure we have everyone lined up. If we want to get the city commissioners in at lunchtime, we'll need to figure that out so we can invite them and arrange something there. Given that our January meeting is set for the 1st, however, obviously that's a holiday. The 8th is, this room's reserved, the 15th is a holiday. So real quickly, we're running out of dates in January, so I think given the fact that we're gonna do this all-day session, we're gonna go ahead and assume we're gonna have no regular meeting in January. We also discussed it probably makes sense to go ahead and cancel our study session because we're gonna be spending a whole day together to talk about all these issues, and we're gonna be getting together to set this agenda. Makes sense, so I think we're looking at that as being our only January meeting. If anybody has any opposition to that, let us know.
Sounds good. We have, I think everyone except Catherine is able to
Yes.
come to the retreat, so I don't know. Maybe she'll take a day off.
I know, I figured 8 out of 9, though, that's
That's pretty good.
pretty tough to get, so
Yeah.
we're gonna struggle to get probably 100%.
That'd be nice.
Also, I'm gonna,
Catherine Sharps isn't able to make it, so, yeah.
Well, there still would be 9
well,
in January or 7? How many people?
We're-
yeah, there'll be
we're
9,
11
we're
right now.
11.
There'll be 7 in January.
No,
We're 11 right
Oh,
now.
that's right, that's right. Okay.
2 of us are gone tonight.
And then I'm going to be sending out a survey, real kind of broad on times for study sessions. I know you voted last year that lunch was the best time. I'll probably just send out a lunch, morning, late afternoon, and get a feel. I will tell you, finding time, now that we have to record them in this room, the same day every month gets tough. So it's not like we're gonna be able to pick between Monday and Friday. If you tell me mornings, we might have one option. So we gotta think hard about, I guess, what works for you guys, and give me the most options that work for you, please, when I ask that, so that we can try to find something, because it is challenging to get this room. I think that is, was there anything else?
Are you gonna wait to do that till after we get a replacement for the KU appointment?
Well, I mean, we know who it is, so we could
Okay.
probably include, I would like to get it set so we know and we can get the room reserved. If you don't mind, I mean, we could just include her in the survey, I would imagine at this point. We know who it is, so.
Is that on the agenda for tomorrow, to approve that appointment? Or not yet?
No, it should be here in a couple of weeks. We just got the KU one today or yesterday.
Okay. All right, is there anything else on the calendar?
I don't think so. We'll talk about too, we'll go into a little more about the January on calendar at the study session.
All right. Nothing else on the agenda except adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
On your last, hold on.
I'll second.
I really like that. Commissioner Hamby and Storm made a motion to adjourn. Your last effort. All in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. Motion passes. We're adjourned.
Chris, thank you for everything.
Is that the worst one?